Chapter 47. Hey brother, you're here for the exam. When Gohan heard the old-fashioned way of addressing him, he ran out of his own world. He looked up and saw a young girl with fair skin. She wasn't very pretty, but she wasn't ugly either. She gave off a very comfortable and energetic vibe. The young girl didn't care about the difference between men and women. She sat down beside him and looked at him with a smile. I think everyone here is here to participate in the assessment. Gohan glanced around. He didn't know why Song Hama wasn't beside him. There were already 4 or 5 people around him. If 3 more came, they would probably be able to enter the exam venue. Haha, I knew you were here to take part in the assessment. The young girl got even closer to Gohan. Brother, your results have always been pretty good, right? Exams and whatnot, nothing is too difficult for you. When Gohan heard this, he curled his lips. He had already guessed what this young girl was trying to do by being so close to him. He took the initiative to move 2 seats to the side, away from this young girl. By the way, Gohan's results were indeed very good, especially in the area of knowledge about sword maidens. After 12 years of dedicated research, coupled with Gohan's high IQ, if he were to take the college entrance exam, it would be easy for him to get 620 out of 650. Don't go, brother, it's not like I'm going to eat you. The young girl followed Gohan and stuck close to him. In order to prevent him from running away, she even took the initiative to hug Gohan's shoulder. She didn't mind pressing her full breasts on Gohan's arm. Feeling the full touch, Gohan wanted to run away even more. He struggled for a while, but he was surprised to find that this young girl's arm strength was surprisingly strong. Gohan had already used 30% of his strength, but he still couldn't break free from the young girl's arm. More than 30% of strength was not something a normal person should have, and Gohan didn't want to expose it. Hee brother, you're quite strong. I didn't expect you to have the strength of a school tyrant with the face of a school tyrant. You're so handsome. So cute. This is the first time Ling has met a man who suits Ling's heart so well. The girl named Ling was smiling like a flower. She even shamelessly sniffed Gohan's body, and smelled Gohan's body fragrance. She happily stomped her feet. Great, this smell is also the one that Ling likes. Gohan saw that he was about to become this girl's toy for no reason. He made a prompt decision and changed the topic. Miss, I'm afraid it's inappropriate for us to do this. As the saying goes, men and women shouldn't touch each other. We should. It's okay, it's okay. My dad said that if you meet a man you like, don't be soft-hearted. Just take them all into your harem. I think you're pretty good. Are you interested in joining my Ling's harem? Ling said heroically. She didn't feel that she had challenged a normal person's worldview at all. Ahem, let's talk about the exam. If I'm not wrong, miss, you want me to help you cheat, right? Gohan decided to change the topic. Hey, don't use the word cheat. Dad told Ling that this is a shortcut for more people to realize their dreams of becoming a sword bearer. This is a very great thing. At this point, Ling raised her fist in annoyance. Why can't this exam be solved with fists? Ling has been memorizing books for the whole night. I don't even have the strength to use my fist. Miss Ling, you may not know this, but this exam room uses the most advanced nano-level photographic fine resolution system. It also blocks all signals from personal terminals and other equipment. Every exam table is more than 10 meters away from each other. It's not that I don't want to help you, but I really can't cheat. Gohan explained with a troubled look. Regarding this, Gohan didn't lie. The anti-cheating system in the exam room had reached the limit that humans could reach. Since ancient times, no one had been able to cheat in the exam room without being discovered. Every year, hundreds of people who didn't believe it were banned from entering the Sword Bearer Service Center for 5 years. Hearing Gohan's words, Ling smiled strangely. She released her hand from Gohan's shoulder and took the initiative to leave Gohan's side. She walked towards the end of the corridor. After a short while, Ling was nowhere to be seen. God! She's finally gone. Gohan breathed a sigh of relief. He was almost tortured to death by this strange girl. Hey! Can you hear me? Suddenly, Gohan heard Ling's familiar voice. Gohan hurriedly looked around, but he didn't see Ling beside him. He then checked his personal terminal. The signal from personal terminals had been blocked, so it couldn't be the voice from his personal terminal. Hee, don't be afraid, brother. Ling isn't some strange ghost or monster. Ling just wants to tell you that those useless anti-cheating devices won't affect our communication. After saying this, Gohan felt a weight on his shoulder. He didn't know when that Ling had sat beside him and hugged his shoulder. Did you install something strange on my body? Why can I hear your voice? Gohan asked. Brother, don't worry. Ling won't use those strange things. Ling just used some interesting tricks. You can call it secret telepathy. Ling smiled even more happily. Sure enough, it was secret telepathy. Gohan's heart skipped a beat. In fact, he had guessed that it was secret telepathy immediately. In the secret manuals passed down by his ancestors, there was mention of this magical method. It was said that it was invented by the ancient heroes. However, with the various technological revolutions, these methods disappeared in the dust of history. Although the secret manual mentioned secret sound transmission, it didn't leave behind any method of practicing it. I can help you. Gohan nodded. But in exchange, you have to tell me what secret telepathy is. You want to learn secret telepathy? Ling looked at Gohan seriously. You won't be able to learn it. This thing can only be learned by someone with great talent. Then how did you learn it? Don't tell me that someone with great talent like you can't even learn such a basic test. How can that be? Of course, Ling's talent is great. Alright, since you want to learn it, Ling will tell you. But you have to wait until after the test. Ling agreed without hesitation. Strange, she actually agreed so readily. According to the settings in the novels, shouldn't this magical method be kept in a bungalow and never be leaked to outsiders? Gohan felt that Ling's unusually straightforward attitude was very strange. Deal. Before the test began, Song Hama returned to the test site. Before Gohan had time to ask him, he was rushed into the test site by the staff. Gohan's seat was on the left side of the test site by the window. Song Hama was assigned to the furthest position on the diagonal. As for that Ling, she was separated from Gohan by an aisle. After entering the test site, the screen on the exam table flashed, and the test questions automatically appeared on the table. In order to speed up the test questions were basically multiple-choice questions. There were a total of 100 questions drawn from the pool of 100,000 questions. Question 1. Who is the first sword maiden that humans synchronized with? A. Chingsua sword. B. Ziying sword. C. Vairocana sword. D. Heavenly cluster cloud sword. Gohan knew the answer after taking a glance at the question. Before he clicked on it, he heard Ling's voice. Brother, what do you choose for the first question? Helpless, Gohan could only blink 4 times. This was the secret code that he had agreed with Ling. Once was A, twice was B, 3 times was C, and 4 times was D. Question 2. What is the meaning of returning the sword? A. Return the sword to its original owner. B. Turn the sword maiden back into a sword. C. Cut off the sword mark from the sword maiden and break away from the relationship. D. Glory belongs to the sword maiden. After answering the question, Gohan waited for a while and realized that Ling did not ask for the answer. It seemed that she already knew the answer to this question. Question 3. During the Battle of Japan's sinking, how many Japanese sword maidens managed to escape? A. 60. B. 70. C. 80. D. 90. Brother, may I ask? Before Ling could finish, Gohan blinked, indicating that the answer to this question should be A. Question 4. Sword Maiden Online. If a sword maiden form has a damage ratio of 0.878 and the wielder's sword element is 10,258, then what is the perfect damage to the defenseless Yuan Ko? In reality, if the sword maiden fights against the standard dragon-level Yuan Ko, and the average damage each time, without using any skills, how many attacks would it take to eliminate this Yuan Ko? A. 9007/350B, 9007/400C, 9258/450D, 9632/500. This question should be very difficult for Ling. This was a very comprehensive question that involved both math and combat knowledge. For anyone, it was a difficult question. Gohan initially thought that Ling would definitely ask him, but after waiting for a long time, he heard Ling's question. However, she asked for the fifth question. Just like that, there were about 80 questions, and Ling asked Gohan for the answer to half of them. Gohan calculated the types of questions that Ling could answer and realized that most of them were questions about history, morality, and laws. Basically, Ling did not know anything about them. However, Ling had never asked Gohan a single question regarding the design of the sword maiden and combat knowledge. Question 88. In reality, if a sword maiden and a sword maiden have a disagreement, what should the sword maiden do? A. Issue an order to the sword maiden. B. Punch the sword maiden. C. Listen to the sword maiden's opinion. D. Discuss it seriously. Sigh, such a stupid question. That Ling probably won't ask me, right? Just as Gohan was thinking about this, Ling's voice appeared in his ears. Brother, is it correct to choose B for question 88? This violent woman has a mental problem. Chapter 48. Question 100. If a sword wielder successfully synchronizes with an ancient sword in Sword Maiden Online, what is the lowest probability of synchronizing in real life? What are the grades of treasured swords and famed swords? A. 20%/15%/10%. B. 25%/20%/15%. C. 30%/25%/20%. D. 15%/10%/6%. Gohan clicked on D and saw that Ling had already raised her hand to signal that he had finished answering the question. She then left the exam hall. As expected, this kind of general knowledge about sword maidens was not difficult for Ling. Gohan smiled and raised his hand to signal that he had finished answering the question. He then followed behind Ling and left the exam hall. Ding dong! Congratulations, sword wielder candidate Gohan, your score is 99 points, which is 9 points higher than the passing mark. You have passed the basic exam. Please proceed to the sword inscription hall and wait for the sword inscription ceremony. As soon as he left the exam hall, Gohan received the notification that he had passed the exam. After all, it was a multiple-choice question, and the computer automatically corrected the paper. It was extremely fast. Hey, Miss Ling, wait. Gohan caught up with Ling. Miss Ling, I think you have passed the exam as well. Hee. I just received the news that Ling got 100 points, Ling said proudly. This guy. He actually scored 1 point higher than me. Gohan was shocked. Gohan knew that the question that he had lost 1 point was a very difficult question. It involved the sword maiden's data, combat ability, battle experience, and fighting style. When he answered it, he had no clue at all. He had basically chosen AC from A, B, D, and C based on his experience. Originally, he was hesitating whether he should tell Ling the answer that he had guessed. He did not expect that Ling did not even ask for the answer from him. This meant that Ling had answered the question correctly on her own to get the full 100 points. In other words, at least in terms of general knowledge about sword maidens, this girl called Ling had already surpassed the genius Gohan, who had studied for 12 years. This made Gohan feel very uncomfortable. He vaguely felt some jealousy towards this girl called Ling. Gohan threw this jealous thought to the back of his mind. It was more important to get down to business. Miss Ling, since you've passed the test, According to our agreement, shouldn't you tell me the method of secret voice transmitting? Of course, no problem. Ling nodded with a smirk. But Gohan, Ling's speaking speed might be a little faster. All right. Gohan nodded. How could the speed of a young girl's speech be so fast? Gohan had this thought, but he regretted it in the next moment. Almost at the same instant that Gohan nodded his head, Ling chanted the secret voice-transmitting incantation at a crazy speed without panting. Mind and spirit unite, Prajna bowl, body weak and introverted, words shatter pill green. Almost at the same time that Gohan nodded his head, Ling recited the secret voice-transmitting incantation at a crazy speed. From the beginning to the end, at least 600 words came out of Ling's mouth in about a minute. It was said that only a host named Master Jian Hua in the Middle Ages 1,000 years ago had achieved such a terrifying and despairing speed. Who would have thought that today, 1,000 years later, this speed would actually appear in the mouth of a young girl? Gohan hadn't thought of this at all. When Ling recited the entire incantation, Gohan was still standing there in a daze. It seemed that he had been completely stunned by Ling's word. Ling's time is precious, so I can only recite it for you once. You must remember it. Otherwise, I won't care if you miss or forget a word. Ling left Gohan in an even happier mood after saying such infuriating words. This arrogant kid actually dared to think of using the secret voice-transmitting incantation. He deserved to die of anger. However, even if she wrote the incantation and told it to him, he wouldn't be able to learn the secret voice-transmitting incantation. This was a unique method passed down from ancient times. If one hadn't systematically studied ancient martial arts, no matter how talented he was, he wouldn't be able to understand what this incantation was talking about. Thank you, Miss Ling, for your teachings. Gohan will remember it. Suddenly, she heard Gohan's thanks. Ling waved her hand. It's all right. It's a piece of cake. A piece of cake, Ling was stunned. She suddenly turned around and saw Gohan standing hundreds of meters away, looking at her with a smile on his face. So, what was that voice that seemed to be ringing in her ears just now? Did I make a mistake? Ling clenched her teeth and felt bitter in her heart. She had actually been tricked by someone in the circle and taken away her family's secret. If this were to be spread to her family, although the elders might not necessarily punish her, Ling's reputation would be ruined in a day. Where did this brat come from? There are only a few families in the circle, and there's never been anyone with the surname Gu. Ling couldn't figure it out no matter how hard she thought about it. How could she know that Gohan had nothing to do with her circle? Could it be that he's not from the circle? Is he a wild guy? Sour Popsicle, who are you greeting? Why are you showing such a disgusting smile? Song Hama walked out of the examination hall, looking exhausted. He saw Gohan smiling creepily at the end of the corridor. It's nothing. I just met an interesting guy. Gohan came back to his senses. Oh right, how's your score? Don't tell me you want me to participate in the sword inscription ceremony alone. Haha, it's just right. Just right. Song Hama laughed awkwardly. It seemed that he had passed by the passing line of 90 points. Oh right, why did you run out before the exam? You almost missed the exam. Gohan asked curiously as he recalled Song Hama's strange disappearance before the exam. Oh that. I heard that a famed sword-rank swordsman appeared in the service center, so I went to watch the show. Song Hama explained. In reality, there were less than 1,000 famed sword-rank swordsmen out of the tens of thousands of swordsmen. Moreover, famed sword-rank swordsmen often fought with Yuan-Kos all over the world to eliminate the possibility of invasion. Therefore, there weren't many opportunities to see a famed sword-rank swordsman with their own eyes. Occasionally, one or two of them would appear in the service center, which was not a big deal. It was not surprising that Song Hama went to watch the show. Is that so? Although Gohan felt that Song Hama was hiding something from him, he didn't ask any further. Since Song Hama wasn't willing to tell the truth, He naturally had his own difficulties. There was no need to force him. The sword engraving hall was actually the hall of the sword pavilion. After the sword engraving ceremony, one could directly enter the sword pavilion and choose a sword lady to synchronize with under the accompaniment of the staff. When Gohan and Song Hama arrived at the sword engraving hall, someone had already arrived. She was on the altar in the middle of the hall, receiving the blessings of the sword engraving ceremony. This person was none other than Miss Ling, who had made some sort of dirty deal with Gohan. So this is the sword engraving ceremony? At this moment, Miss Ling was floating in the air in the middle of the altar. 5 lightsabers were inserted into the Baihui acupoint on the top of her head, the Mingmen acupoint in the middle of her spine, the Huin acupoint in the middle of her vagina, the Shinjua acupoint in the middle of her navel, and the Shanzhong acupoint in the middle of her chest. These 5 acupoints represented the 5 most important acupoints of a human. If any of them were damaged, it would have a fatal effect on a human. At this moment, Ling allowed the 5 lightsabers to be inserted into her 5 acupoints. However, these 5 lightsabers were not real swords. They were swords made of medicinal qi made of various rare materials. These medicinal qi swords would not cause any damage to the human body. Instead, they could quickly and directly inject the medicinal power into the body. This was the core step of the sword engraving ceremony. These 5 costly lightsabers were the obstacles that prevented the Human Council from promoting the sword engraving ceremony on a large scale. It was said that 60% of the Human Council's annual income was invested into the sword engraving ceremony. After about 5 minutes, the exposed parts of the medicinal qi swords became shorter and shorter. Finally, when they were completely absorbed by her body, Ling landed on the ground and ended the sword engraving ceremony. "All right, Miss Ling. After you put on your clothes, please follow the staff into the sword pavilion to choose your sword lady." The host of the sword engraving ceremony, a sword wielder of the sword engraving ceremony, instructed Ling kindly. He then put on a sullen expression and pointed a finger at Gohan's nose. "Come up here. Hurry up. Don't dawdle and waste our time." Unlike how he spoke to Ling earlier, this sword wielder treated Gohan with complete disgust and indifference. Seriously, this piece of trash who came to participate in the sword engraving ceremony as soon as he reached 100 quarks is a complete waste of our precious human resources. According to historical statistics, less than 3% of the sword wielders could achieve synchronization and coordination at 100 quark. For human society, it was naturally an extreme waste of resources. Many sword wielders kept proposing proposals to change the minimum requirement of holding the sword engraving ceremony to 150 quark. It was said that the Human Council would hold a general meeting soon to vote on this important proposal. Perhaps because of this, the person in charge of the sword engraving ceremony hated people like Gohan so much. Regarding this, Gohan's attitude was indifferent. If he was disgusted, then let him be. It was not like he would lose a piece of flesh. Would he dare to go against the rules of the human race and not hold a sword inscription ceremony for himself? Of course, the administrator did not dare to go against the rules. Gohan took off his clothes and was only wearing his underpants. He was blown into the air by the air current from the center of the altar. A staff member poured medicinal liquid into the 5 corners of the altar. Under the effect of the altar, the medicinal liquid turned into 5 light swords and shot into 5 acupoints on Gohan. He didn't feel any pain. On the contrary, Gohan felt a cool sensation. It was as if he had touched a cold popsicle on a hot summer day. Chapter 49. This way, please. A girl with a sweet smile stretched out her hand and guided Gohan into the sword pavilion. She introduced the place as they walked. The sword pavilion was left behind 900 years ago for the first batch of sword bearers to store their bodies after they passed away. It's also a place for new sword bearers to start their dreams. Each of the 8 headquarter cities in the world has its own sword pavilion. Because the 8 headquarter cities were established at different times, the oldest one, Beijing City's sword pavilion, has more than 2,000 natural sword ladies of various levels. The youngest, New York City, has less than 600 natural sword ladies. Yuzhong City's sword pavilion is the 3rd headquarter city in the world, so we have more than 1,600 sword ladies. Question. Gu Han interrupted the guide's introduction. Since there are a large number of natural sword ladies in the sword garret of other cities, what should I do if the sword lady who can synchronize with me happens to be in another city? If I have the Yu King Gojian sword in the game, her natural body should be in Beijing City. You can choose the artificial sword of the Yu King Gojian sword. The Yu King Gojian sword was artificially forged 200 years ago. We have more than 10 artificially forged Yu King Gojian sword. The guide replied with a smile. Of course, if you want the natural sword of the Yu King Gojian sword, you can go to other cities and experiment with synchronization. All the sword pavilions in the cities are open to all human sword bearers. However, other cities don't provide free sword inscription ceremonies. You have to pay for it yourself. What's the price of paying for the sword inscription ceremony? Gohan asked. According to the market price of the materials yesterday, it's 56,874 renminbi, including tax, the guide answered fluently. She was indeed a professional. Ahem, the wind has been quite strong recently. I'll just stay here and take a look. Gohan decisively gave up on the idea of going to other sword pavilions. 50,000 renminbi could buy a lot of sword essence pills. The guide smiled and continued. The sword pavilion is divided into 6 levels. Each level has a different level of sword ladies. For example, the first level has ancient sword ladies. In our Yuzhong sword pavilion, there are a total of 654 natural-born ancient sword maidens and 3986 artificially forged sword maidens. Among the innate sword ladies, 298 have already been taken away by the sword-bearers, and the remaining 356 are stored in the first floor of our sword pavilion. By the way, if you have the feeling that you want a sword when you see it, it means that you have a sword affinity with the sword. The success rate of you synchronizing with the sword will greatly increase. Sword affinity was a very rare feeling. Usually, only 3 out of 100 sword wielders would be able to sense the sword affinity. Moreover, once a sword affinity connection was formed with a sword maiden, it meant that the chances of the sword maiden synchronizing with one's sword maiden would double. Along with the intensity of the sword affinity's reaction, the multiplier would also increase. If this sword affinity's reaction was strong enough to knock someone unconscious, then the success rate would be almost 50%. What you are looking at now is an ancient sword lady, the blue light sword. The guide walked the girl to a counter where the sword maidens were stored. She pointed to a sword that was flashing with blue light in a brocade box and said, "The blue light sword is ranked 1945 in the ancient sword records. It was the sword of Nalin Mingzhu during the Qing dynasty. It is covered in blue light and has the special ability to confuse vision. It is a Confucian sword maiden." Gohan noticed that in this brocade box, there were 2 grooves for the sword maidens, 1 gold and 1 silver. However, the gold groove was already empty. Only the silver groove was for the sword. The guide noticed Gohan's gaze and took the initiative to explain. There are 2 positions in the brocade box. One is for the blue light sword, and the other is for the artificial sword forged by our sword bearers. The blue light sword's natural body has already been taken away by a sword bearer, so what's left is the artificial sword forged. Lord Gohan, do you want to try synchronizing with this blue light sword? The guide tried her best to recommend, don't underestimate this artificial sword. Other than the sword maiden, that is a little sluggish. It has reached 85% of the natural sword maiden's strength. Moreover, the blue light sword synchronization success rate is the highest. Out of 10 people, 2 succeeded. It is much higher than the other swords. Artificial swords were artificial swords forged by human sword-bearers using the natural sword Maiden as a template. Otherwise, with less than 10,000 natural sword maidens, they would not be able to satisfy the needs of more than 100,000 sword-bearers. Based on the strength of a master blacksmith, the difference between the forged sword and the natural sword maiden's strength ranged from 50% to 99%. The imitation swords that could be placed in the sword pavilion for new sword-bearers to choose from were usually 80% and above quality. Most importantly, when forging the imitation swords, they would consider the applicability of synchronization. Although the synchronization success rate was still lower than 30%, it was much higher than the natural sword maiden's 0.5% success rate. Therefore, many sword-bearers would choose an imitation sword as their sword maiden after their attempts to synchronize with the natural sword maiden failed. It was a helpless choice. Although the guide tried her best to recommend this blue light sword imitation to Gohan, Gohan was not interested at all. He was determined to be the strongest sword-bearer. Why would he want these artificial swords? In the future, don't bring me to the counters where the natural sword maiden is not around, Gohan said to the guide calmly. Understood. Although the guide agreed, the smile on her face disappeared. On the contrary, she was as disgusted as the manager just now. Does she think I'm a toad trying to eat swan meat? I'm wasting her time, right? Gohan guessed the reason for the guide's disgust. It was nothing more than him taking too long to choose and wasting her rest time. This is the Gale Sword, a martial arts sword maiden. It is ranked 1352 in the ancient sword record. After bringing Gohan to the counter, the guide said such a short sentence and did not say anything else. If it was not for the rule that the name, ranking, and the type of sword-bearer, the guide would not have said a word. Gohan glanced at the Gale Sword. Suddenly, a feeling of wanting her welled up in his heart. This feeling was extremely strong, to the point that Gohan could not move at all. Could this be the sword affinity induction? Gohan immediately thought of the sword affinity that the guide had mentioned. Judging from the intensity of the reaction, Gohan was sure that if he chose this Gale Sword, the success rate would be almost above 40%. Mr. Gohan, are you going to choose the Gale Sword? Seeing that Gohan had been standing beside the Gale Sword for a long time, the guide hurriedly squeezed out a smile. In her heart, she could not wait for this guy to choose synchronization with the Gale Sword so that he would not waste her time. No, let's change to another one. Gohan shook his head and used his strong willpower to overcome the intense temptation of the sword affinity induction. He slowly moved away from the Gale Sword. Most sword wielders would want to synchronize with a sword maiden when they realized that they had a sword affinity induction with them. After all, the success rate was more than 10 times higher than choosing a sword maiden who had no sword affinity induction. However, Gohan had given up on it. It was not because of anything else, but because the Hurricane Sword was not considered a strong sword maiden among the ancient sword maidens. It was not even in the top 1,000 of the ancient sword record. How could it be the choice of the arrogant Gohan? This way. The guide rolled her eyes at Gohan and brought him to the next counter where the natural sword maiden was. After they were about 5 meters away from the Gale Sword, the strong sword affinity induction disappeared. However, before it disappeared, Gohan seemed to hear a sigh from the Gale Sword. Is it a sigh because I did not choose her to leave that dark world? Gohan thought to himself. He could not help but pity the Gale Sword. He even had the thought of turning back. However, this thought was quickly cut off by Gohan. He wanted to be the strongest sword maiden and the strongest sword wielder. Bloodthirsty Sword, Murderous Path Sword Maiden, ranked 987 in the ancient sword records. The guide brought Gohan to another natural sword maiden. What Gohan did not expect was that the moment he approached it, a sword affinity induction that was not weaker than the Gale Sword's suddenly blossomed in Gohan's heart. I did not expect to meet two sword maidens that have a sword affinity induction with me. Gohan smiled bitterly. To be able to have a sword affinity induction with two sword maidens at the same time, this talent could not be described as 1 in 100. It had reached the standard of 1 in 10,000. However, he was trash with an innate sword element value of only 9 quarks. Did he really have such a powerful talent? Another one. The bloodthirsty sword was obviously not the sword maiden that Gohan needed. He still chose to leave. In the next few minutes, Gohan had already looked down on more than 20 natural sword maidens. What was unbelievable was that every natural sword maiden had a strong sword affinity induction with Gohan. It was as if they all wanted Gohan to give them to Dezhou. This was something that had never happened before. The guy with the most records in history had only managed to have a sword affinity induction with 6 sword maidens at the same time. Gohan had already had more than 20, and the number of natural sword maidens he visited was still increasing. However, the strange thing was that those imitation sword maidens did not have any reaction to Gohan. It was clearly recorded that these artificial imitation sword maidens were the most likely to have a sword affinity induction. The rules of the world seemed to have reversed when it came to Gohan. At the same time, in these few minutes, Gohan also saw 6 sword bearers who had also come to choose sword maidens. When they chose their own sword maidens and tried to synchronize, they all failed miserably. All 6 of them knelt on the ground without exception. They had all failed. In comparison, Gohan, who was able to sense his sword affinity with every single one of them, was truly a fortunate existence. This natural sword maiden did not have any reaction to me. While sighing, Gohan suddenly realized that the natural sword maiden that he was approaching did not have a sword affinity induction with him. What's this sword? Before the guide could introduce it, Gohan took the initiative to look at the nameplate on the counter. He wanted to know the name of this strange sword maiden that did not have a sword affinity induction with him. Hey! Sour Popsicle, you're here too! Gohan was suddenly patted on the shoulder. Startled, Gohan turned around and saw Song Hama standing behind him with a smirk on his face. Mr. Song Hama, this is the casted cloud iron sword you're looking for. Natural sword maiden, martial arts, ranked 455th in the ancient sword records. Casted cloud iron sword. Gohan felt that this name was quite familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. I say, Sour Popsicle, don't tell me you've also taken a fancy to my casted cloud iron sword. Song Hama punched Gohan, but I'm sorry, this casted cloud iron sword has already been reserved by me. I remember now. Isn't the casted cloud iron sword the ancient sword maiden in the game? Chapter 50. Cast cloud iron sword? Gohan recalled that Song Hama's ancient sword maiden in the game was indeed that somewhat rough sword maiden, Cloud Cast Iron Sword. So, your first target is the sword maiden Cloud Cast Iron in the game? Gohan thought for a moment. As his best friend, he advised, have you really thought it through? Although you have successfully synchronized it in the game, in reality, your success rate is only 3 times higher than other natural sword maidens. Are you sure you want to choose this sword maiden with a 90% failure rate? This is your third chance. If you fail, you know the consequences. I have no choice. Song Hama acted as if he was forced by reality. However, the expression on his face was unusually determined. I have already promised the cast cloud iron sword in the game. In reality, I will definitely save her from her endless slumber. I understand. Gohan laughed. Since you have promised her, please continue. I will not try the cast cloud iron sword. You do it. Hee, to be honest, the cast cloud iron sword is strong and domineering. I really don't want to be with her in reality. With that, Song Hama walked to the front of the cast cloud iron sword. He placed his hand on the cast cloud iron sword and was about to strike it. Lord Song Hama, please wait. At this moment, the guide in charge of Song Hama spoke. I need to confirm with you one last time. You have decided to synchronize with the natural sword Maiden, the cast cloud iron sword. Even if the success rate is less than 10%, do you not regret it or complain? Ah, actually I do regret it. But now that you are asking me this, do I still have the cheek to regret it? You really should have warned me earlier. Song Hama shook her head. Toad, do you feel like you can't wait to have her? Gohan decided to persuade him one last time. If you don't feel that way, it is better to give up. Ha! Sour Popsicle, you are talking about sword affinity, right? Song Hama nodded and touched his chest. He said in a low voice, I have been impatient since the first time we met. Sorry, I was wrong. Gohan's apology was sincere. What Song Hama had was the real bond between him and the sword lady. But what about himself? Regardless of whether it was the Chinpin sword or the Yu King Go Jian sword, he probably pursued them with the attitude of making use of them. Then, Cloudcast Iron, I, the stinky toad, am coming! Song Hama shouted loudly. After mustering up enough strength for his spirit, he raised his sword without hesitation and tightly grabbed onto the cast cloud iron hilt. In an instant, the light shone brightly. Resplendent light shone from the cast cloud iron's blade. Like fairies from the Dunhuang kingdom, they flew around Song Hama. When there were enough of these fairies, and they had enough secret techniques, Song Hama's body suddenly exploded. As if they had received a command, they flew and poured into Song Hama's 10 orifices at the same time. P.S. The 10 orifices are the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, plus the other 3 orifices. Girls should have 11 orifices. Don't mind these details. What a coincidence, I actually saw a lucky fellow who succeeded in synchronizing. Ling, who had entered the sword pavilion earlier, muttered as she walked to Song Hama's side. It seemed that she had not confirmed which sword lady she wanted to synchronize with. Isn't this Brother Gohan? Ling seemed to have just realized that the person standing here was Gohan, who had cheated happily with her. It seems that this lucky friend came together with Brother Gohan. Ling moved closer to Song Hama and touched his iron-like skin. Then, she looked at the sword lady's label beside the now empty brocade box. TSK. I didn't expect you to be a natural-born sword lady. Brother, your friend's luck is really too good. Ling said with a smile. You better not touch him again. Gohan said coldly. Didn't your teacher tell you that you can't touch a sword-bearer who is synchronizing? What if it affects him? That's just an old man's groundless fears. Ling said indifferently. I only touched him a little. He won't be able to live without a piece of flesh. On the other hand, you clearly accepted such a precious gift from her, yet you still use such a fierce tone to speak to Linlin. Are you really able to face your own conscience like this? Linlin said in a heartbroken voice. Gohan decided not to talk to this woman anymore. It was purely a waste of his time. However, just because Gohan didn't plan to talk to Ling didn't mean that Ling didn't want to talk to Gohan. Hey, have you thought about which sword you want to synchronize with? Do you know which sword Ling wants to synchronize with? Have you reached that level in the game? Do you know which Ling is waiting for you in the game? Do you want to go out for a meal later? Ling really likes men like you. Do you want to go out and get a room later? Ling has to contribute to the survival and development of mankind. Do you want to go to the game tomorrow to clear a dungeon? Linlin knows a super strategy for an SS-grade dungeon. Ling was like a chatterbox that couldn't be closed once it was opened. She kept asking questions, and Gohan almost couldn't hold back his anger and punched her in the head. Fortunately, when Gohan had this urge, Song Hama's synchronization was about to end. At that moment, Song Hama's stomach was as big as a water tank, just like what happened in the game's dungeon back in the fleeting calendar. From the front, Song Hama's bulging belly covered his entire upper body. Only half of Song Hama's head could be seen. It can actually be so big. Ling was dumbfounded when she saw Song Hama's tank-sized belly. It's probably because of the cloud-cast iron. Gohan rubbed his nose uncertainly. I heard that edgeless heavy swords like the cloud-cast iron require a large amount of mind palace space. Legend has it that the second most famous sword, Darksteel Heavy Sword, can expand one's belly to twice the size of one's body. Ling was speechless. The thought of having a belly that was twice the size of a normal person sent chills down her spine. All right, it's coming out. When Song Hama's belly expanded to its limit, a strong light shot out from his belly. A baby slowly floated out of Song Hama's belly. Is this a real nascent soul? Gohan had seen her once in the Instance Dungeon, and again in his Zifu, but this was the first time he saw the appearance of the Sword Maiden's nascent soul in real life. So beautiful! No matter how many times I look at it, it's still so beautiful. Ling revealed an infatuated look. Indeed, the moment the nascent soul of the Sword Lady was born, everything was beautiful. In a thousandth of a second, the cloud-cast iron's nascent soul began to grow and change. In biological terms, this was called abnormal development. In less than 30 seconds, the originally dazzling nascent soul had completed its abnormal development and turned into a beautiful girl. Oh no, it was a girl with muscles all over her body. She was more than 2 meters tall and sturdy enough to kill a cow. Yes, a beautiful girl. Best friend. Cloudcast Iron has finally found you. As soon as he finished his transformation and stood on the ground, he excitedly and enthusiastically hugged Song Hama, whose body had just become soft, and directly called Song Hama his best friend. He skipped the stage of calling Song Hama by his first name and didn't know what happened between Song Hama and Cast Cloud Iron. Cloudcast Iron, although I am very happy to be in your arms, but can you put me down first? Song Hama's expression was frighteningly fierce and the whites of his eyes rolled up. I am about to suffocate to death because of you. The way Cast Cloud Iron was hugging Song Hama was like a cat owner hugging its master, rubbing its face crazily. The 1.6 meter tall Song Hama in the 2.1 meter tall strong Cast Cloud Iron's arms was like a cat owner hugging a kitten. Ah. Sorry, best friend, Cloudcast Iron was too excited. Cloudcast Iron hurriedly put Song Hama on the ground and shyly looked at his messy hair. Best friend, if you can call me Cloudcast Iron Little Union, that would be great. Blurg, blurg, it was rare for Gohan and Ling to act in unison. Brother Gohan, do you know which ancient sword is number 1 in the ancient sword record? Ling, who was walking with Gohan again, suddenly asked. It's the Yi Xian sword. Gohan instinctively answered. Immediately, he thought of something. Could it be that the Yi Xian sword is in Yuzhang City's sword pavilion? That's right. This is also the reason why I, Ling, came all the way from Yanjing City. Chapter 51. Gohan did not expect Ling to be from Yanjing Bay City. As the only 2 super bay cities in Huaxia, Yuzhang City and Yanjing City rarely interacted with each other. Only the sword bearers would travel between the 2 cities. As for the rest of the common people, 99% of them would stay in the base city where they were born until they died of old age. Yuzhang City and Yanjing City were separated by more than 1,400 kilometers. There were hundreds of Yuan Ko's strongholds and dozens of Yuan Ko's forces within this 1,400-kilometer distance. Because the sky was occupied by the powerful dragons and phoenixes, the safest way to travel from one base city to the other was by land. On this road, there were hundreds of brutal battles every day, and 3 sword bearers had died on this road. That was why, unless there was no other choice, no mortal would have the will to step on this path of death. Only foolish sword-bearers who fought for the future of humanity, like their sword ladies, would be willing to sacrifice their blood and lives for this path. Therefore, it was very strange that a common person like Ling would appear in Yuzhang City. No sword-bearer would be willing to bring a common person who was a hindrance through this road, unless the common person had an extraordinary background. Thinking of Ling's ancient martial arts skills like telepathy, Gohan was almost certain that Ling's family was definitely extraordinary. How did you know that the Yi Xian sword is in Yuzhang City? Gohan asked curiously. Didn't the council say that the Yi Xian sword has been sealed forever and is not allowed to come out? Their location is the council's S-level secret. How did you know they are here? Because. Ling stopped abruptly in the middle of her sentence. Damn it. My family doesn't allow Ling to tell anyone. There's nothing to hide. Anyway, the Yi Xian sword is here and she must be Ling's. You've been talking nonsense with Ling for a long time. Let me ask you, where is the Yi Xian sword? All of a sudden, Ling abruptly pointed her finger at the nose of the guide behind her. She scolded him. No, she scolded him with a question. Miss Ling, I really don't know. The guide stumbled back in fear. Our leader never told us that the Yi Xian sword was here. Do you know? Ling pointed her fingertips at Gohan's guide again. The woman, who was disdainful just now, shook her head in panic. They don't know where the Yi Xian sword is, so don't make things difficult for them, Miss Ling. Let me lead you to the Yi Xian sword. A wizened old man suddenly appeared between Gohan and Ling. The old man was like a cotton ball that had shrunk into water. His waist was bent into an N shape, and his entire body was curled up. After saying this, the old man walked in a certain direction without caring about anything else. Ling followed behind the old man with a smile on her face. Gohan did not hesitate to keep up with Ling's pace. Hey! Sour Popsicle, what are you trying to do? Song Hama hurriedly pulled on the corner of Gohan's clothes. Are you crazy? It's obvious that these two people have some kind of shocking secret on them. If you follow them and find out about their secret, won't it bode ill for you? Listen to me, just find a random sword maiden to coordinate with us. We don't want to get involved in this mess. No, Toad, I'm definitely getting involved in this mess. Gohan firmly pushed Song Hama's hand away. Why? Why do you want to get involved in this mess? Song Hama did not understand. Since I know that the strongest ancient sword-rank sword lady is here, what reason do I have not to have her? After saying this, Gohan quickly followed Ling, who was getting further and further away. F***ck, I'm unlucky. I'll go with you then. Song Hama was helpless. He was not the kind of person who would abandon his brothers. However, when he was about to chase after them that day, Song Hama and Gohan's guide blocked his way at the same time. Lord Song Hama, you have completed the synchronization and completed your mission. Please leave the sword pavilion immediately. Song Hama's guide's voice was gentle, but his attitude was firm. Then why can my friend follow you? First, Mr. Gohan has not chosen a sword maiden yet. Second, with the pavilion master there, we have no right to interfere. Ling, is this good-looking young man a newcomer to your family? The old man asked softly. They were already deep in the sword pavilion, and they could no longer see the counters where the sword maidens were placed. Mr. Gohan is a genius. Our family does not have someone like Mr. Gohan. He was picked up by Ling along the way. Well, since he was picked up by Miss Lin, it's fine if he follows you. Otherwise, I, an old man, will have a good talk with this young man who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. The old man was full of malice. Mister, may I ask if you are the pavilion master of the sword pavilion? Cloudy Sword Immortal Lulei? Gohan suddenly asked when he noticed the old man's bad attitude. Interesting. A young man of your age knows my name. The old man was a little surprised. It had been more than 30 years since he had become famous. This young man, who had just reached adulthood, actually knew his name and nickname. It really was him. Gohan also probed. He didn't think that the old man in front of him was actually Heavenly Sword Immortal Lulei, who stood at the peak. Cloudy Sword Immortal was the title of the sword bearer. The title was specially created by the Sword Committee based on the sword bearer's ability, characteristics, achievements, and many other factors. Only sword-bearers of famed swords and above could receive a title from the Sword Committee. This title was very particular. Cloudy described the characteristics of the sword-bearer, and Sword Immortal represented the sword-bearer's realm. As the name suggested, adding the word Sword Immortal to the title meant that Lu Lei was a legendary sword-bearer who had reached the peak of the immortal sword realm. A sword-bearer who had reached the immortal sword realm in the world. Many sword-bearers might not have the opportunity to meet a sword-bearer of the immortal sword realm in their lifetime. However, on the first day Gohan became a sword-bearer, he actually stood together with a sword-bearer of the immortal sword realm. This made Gohan not know where to put his hands. Gohan likes to read books and read some stories. Over time, he understood many of the legends of the ancestors. When Lord Lu Lei was still a sword-bearer of the immortal sword realm, he single-handedly fought against the 8 great gold saints. The younger generation will never forget this story for the rest of their lives. Gohan composed himself and sent a resounding bootlicking over. As the saying goes, flattery never works. Haha, that's all in the past. Let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about it. I'm just an old man guarding the door now. It could be seen that this 9-firmament sword master still valued and was very proud of his heroic deeds. His attitude towards Gohan had also changed from being cold and indifferent to being kind and friendly. We're here. This is the place. If Miss Ling hadn't come, I might not have opened this door even if I died. Lu Lei patted on what was clearly a thick wall, and a door opened out of thin air. Of course, it wasn't such an old-fashioned mechanism. Lu Lei patted on what was clearly a thick wall, and a big hole appeared in the ground out of thin air. Ling and Gohan, who were not mentally prepared, directly fell into this big hole. When the somewhat dizzy Gohan stood up from the ground and regained his focus, he was surprised to find that he was actually in a large desert. Countless ancient swords were densely inserted in this desert, exuding a kind of emotion full of sorrow. This was a vast underground desert the size of a football field. Above their heads was a rock wall made of stalactites, and there were some dim incandescent lamps around to provide some light. The Yi Xian sword is here. Miss Ling, this old man's body is weak, so I'll go back to sleep first. I'll pick you up in an hour. Whether you can find the Yi Xian sword or not will depend on your luck. With that, Lu Lei's voice disappeared from above their heads. Where are we? Why are there so many swords and broken swords here? As far as the eye could see, some of the swords stuck in the desert were intact, while others were broken into 2. This is the land of buried swords. Ling tidied up her somewhat dusty pants. For the past 700 years, all the sword maidens belonging to Yuzhang City who were broken in battle and couldn't be saved are buried here. So that's how it is. No wonder I feel an indescribable sorrow here. During the battle with Yuan Ko, there were always some unfortunate sword maidens who couldn't return to their dimensional pockets in time and had their bodies destroyed by a powerful opponent. From then on, they completely perished, never to awaken again. That's right. Since they're broken and can't be saved, why are there swords here that look intact? Gohan asked curiously. A quarter of the sword maidens here were actually intact. Because the land of buried swords is a magical place. It has the special ability to heal broken sword maidens. If you have enough time and are lucky enough, you might even be able to resurrect them. That's why the Sword Council threw those broken swords here. But unfortunately, there aren't many cases of this resurrection, only in the double digit. But why is the Yi Xian here? Didn't the council say that she was sealed? Why would she be in a place like the land of buried swords? Gohan continued to ask. That's because the leisurely celestial sword wasn't sealed but broken. Ling casually revealed a shocking inside story. Why would the smart people of the Sword Council, who think that they are unparalleled in the world, publicize their stupid things to the public? For you to tell me such explosive news, I won't be silenced by you guys, right? Gohan asked the question he was most afraid of in a joking tone. I didn't expect my brother Gohan to be a conspiracy theorist. Ling sarcastically said, since you came with me, I can guarantee your safety. But you have to help me find the Yi sword. Since you even know that old man Lu Lei, you don't need me to teach you how to distinguish the characteristics of the Yi sword, right? That's not necessary. I do know the characteristics of the Yi sword. Gohan nodded. I want to ask one more thing. If I find the Yi sword first and coordinate with her, what will Miss Ling do? I'll kill you. Ling suddenly turned around and glared at Gohan fiercely. But in an instant, her expression changed into a bright smile. I'm joking. You'll marry me. Chapter 52. The leisurely celestial sword wasn't very old. Among all the sword ladies of the pre-Great Calamity era, it could be considered of very young existence, being less than 1,100 years old at most. However, such a young sword lady naturally had her own special reasons for being able to rank first among the numerous ancient sword-grade sword ladies. That was because the leisurely celestial sword lady was the only sword lady of the royal way among all the ancient sword-grade sword ladies. Only the swords of the royal way sword ladies of the royal way before the Qin dynasty could become the sword lady of the royal way, or the sword ladies of the founding emperors who had once unified the world after the Qin dynasty could become the sword lady of the royal way. As long as its master hadn't ascended to the peak of the world, no matter how powerful the sword was, it wouldn't be able to become the sword lady of the royal way. The most famous example was the heavenly sword, which Gohan had pursued as the #1 treasured sword. Although its master, Cao Cao, had been honored by Cao Pai as the martial emperor of Wei after his death, unfortunately, the Sima clan had usurped the world before the Cao clan had unified it. Cao Cao hadn't become the founding emperor after all, so the heavenly sword could only be a sword lady of the martial way, not the sword lady of the royal way. Actually, to many sword lady researchers, the fact that the leisurely celestial sword could become the sword lady of the royal way was also a violation of the principles of the founding emperor. This was because the leisurely celestial sword's master, Sun Yixin, had only occupied part of the southern part of Huaxia before his death. Although his successor, Headmaster Jiang, had once unified Huaxia in name, in reality, there were many warlords in the Huaxia continent, and the Japanese pirates had wreaked havoc in China. After finally settling the Japanese pirates with great difficulty, the Son of Heaven had emerged from Chang'an and established the world in 2 years, and ruled it in 5 years. Therefore, in the field of history, Headmaster Jiang had never been treated as the founding emperor, let alone Headmaster Jiang's master, Sun Yixin. However, the leisurely celestial sword had mysteriously become the sword lady of the royal way, and possessed the abilities of the sword lady of the royal way. After countless debates, historians finally came to a conclusion. A certain party that would be banned for writing its name had always insisted that it had inherited Sun Yixin's legacy and was the orthodox Huaxia. Therefore, in a sense, Sun Yixin became the founding emperor, and the Yi sword became the emperor's sword. The only evidence for this was that the dynasty established by a certain party had become the last Huaxia dynasty before the Great Calamity. It had also become the most powerful dynasty in the history of Huaxia. P.S. In terms of absolute military strength, the current Huaxia is definitely the most powerful. Why don't you let the Great Han Iron Cavalry and the People's Liberation Army fight it out? However, the light immortal sword was the weakest among all the sword maidens. This was because Sun Yixin's position as the founding emperor was too undeserved. However, no matter what, the Yi sword was still a King's Way swordmistress. It was the strongest swordmistress among the ancient sword-grade swordmistresses, and it was the best choice for any ancient sword-grade swordmistress who aspired to become a powerful sword-wielder. The main characteristics of the light immortal sword had long since been written in the Swordmistress Studies textbook. It had a kettle hilt similar to a Western rapier, a slender blade that was 100 centimeters long and weighed 450 grams. It had a long red tassel that covered half the length of the blade, and the words "The world is public" that were deeply engraved into its bones. In short, the light immortal sword wasn't hard to find because its characteristics were very obvious. However, it wasn't easy to find because there were just too many swords here. Moreover, in truth, Guhan was different from Linling, who was extremely serious when searching, like a butterfly flying around the sword burial grounds, wishing that he had 4 pairs of eyes. Guhan was like a gentle breeze and a gentle drizzle, leisurely and leisurely. Most of the time, he would pay attention to the broken parts of each broken sword. From the mottled and ragged cracks, it was as if he could see the countless dangerous battles that they had experienced, as well as the brilliant death that bloomed at the last moment of their lives. Perhaps, the home of me and my sword ladies will also be here. Guhan seemed to see his future from this place. Hey Ling, can you be more serious? Are you even a man for dilly-dallying like this? Guhan's casual attitude angered the impatient Ling. Half an hour had passed, and half of the 1 hour that Lu Lei had given them had passed. However, Ling had only searched a small portion of the sword burial grounds. She hadn't searched the remaining 2/3 of the sword burial ground. Hee, do you think I'll let you have the light immortal sword after I find it? Guhan sneered. The reason he had slowed down his search was to repay Ling for bringing him to the sword burial grounds. However, if he managed to find the light immortal sword in such a short time, it would mean that the light immortal sword belonged to him, Guhan. If that happened, he wouldn't stand on ceremony and hold the light immortal sword in his hands. Why would he give it to Ling like an idiot? After searching for a few minutes, Guhan suddenly felt a familiar throbbing in his heart. This is the sword affinity resonance. Guhan's expression changed. If a sword affinity resonance could appear in the sword burial grounds, it meant that there must be a successfully resurrected broken sword hidden nearby. Moreover, there was a high possibility that this broken sword was the light immortal sword that Ling had been searching for. Guhan immediately walked in the direction of the sword affinity resonance. After walking for less than 10 meters, the sword affinity resonance in Guhan's heart was magnified to its strongest level. This meant that the broken sword was near Guhan's feet. At this moment, there were 4 swords closest to Guhan, but all of them were broken swords. It was impossible for a broken sword to have a sword affinity resonance with him. Could it be that there were other swords buried in the yellow sand? Without any hesitation, Guhan suppressed the throbbing in his heart and started to dig at the yellow sand under his feet. He did not know what material the yellow sand was made of. It looked like fine and soft sand, but when he dug at it, it felt like he was using needles. Soon, the inconspicuous yellow sand rubbed against Guhan's palms until they were bloody. "What are you doing?" A question exploded in Guhan's ears. It was Ling's voice. She had noticed Guhan's unusual behavior and quickly ran to Guhan's side. "It's nothing. I'm just bored," Guhan said casually, but his hands dug even faster. As long as he dug out the sword before Ling did, he could confirm that it was the light immortal sword and then touch the hilt of her sword. Then, he would be able to synchronize with the light immortal sword. When that happened, no matter how powerful Ling was, she would not be able to take the light immortal sword from him. Fine. I'll let Ling dig it for you." After saying that, Ling threw a flying kick at Guhan's handsome face. If the kick landed, Guhan's face would probably be disfigured. Damn it! Guhan had no choice but to twist his body in a strange way and dodged Ling's flying kick. However, he also exposed the half-dug hole in his hand to Ling. Although Guhan dodged the flying kick, the suffocating throbbing in his chest became even more intense. He groaned, clutched his chest and half-knelt on the ground. He almost fainted. You're quite skillful. You actually dodged Ling's kick. Ling is liking you more and more. Wait until Ling sees what you're hiding in this hole, then I'll comfort you," Ling said with a smile. Her hands did not slow down at all. She continued to dig the sand hole that Guhan had just dug. Seeing Ling's action of taking over a magpie's nest, Guhan just knelt on the ground and did not move. It was not because Guhan had given up fighting for it, but because the throbbing brought about by the sword affinity was too intense. Guhan had to resist this suffocating feeling while secretly accumulating his strength. Only when he was sure that what Ling had dug out was the Yi Xian sword would he unleash his strength and fight for it with her. Soon, Ling's hand seemed to have touched something hard and stopped. Her originally quick and rough movements immediately became meticulous and minute. After slowly wiping away a layer of floating sand, a large red sword tassel was reflected in Guhan and Ling's eyes at the same time. It's her. This is the sword tassel unique to the Yi Xian sword. Ling was so excited that her heart was about to jump out of her chest. Although she did not know how the mysterious Guhan knew that the Yi Xian sword was buried here, there was no doubt that the Yi Xian sword was hers. Ling reached out her hand and was about to pick up the strongest ancient sword from the sand hole. In the next moment, Ling's expression tensed up and she rolled to the left. At the same time, she used her right hand to block a flying foot in front of her. How dare you fight back? Ling was furious. She looked at Guhan, who was also climbing up from the ground, and said, "This sword belongs to Ling." Miss Ling said, "It's yours, so it's yours. However, Guhan has a small request. Can I touch this sword before Miss Ling? What do you think, Miss Ling?" The throbbing in Guhan's heart grew stronger and stronger. It was so strong that Guhan was almost certain that as long as he touched the Yi Xian sword, there would be a 50% chance of success in synchronization. Do you really think that Ling is stupid? What a joke. What if Guhan succeeded in synchronization after touching it first? Although Ling did not think that his chances were high. How about this? This sword belongs to you, Brother Guhan. However, Ling has the same request as you. Before that, let Ling touch it first. That's a good choice. Looking at how relaxed she is, Ling doesn't have any sword affinity. Her chances of success aren't high. Guhan pondered silently. He almost nodded his head in agreement and let Ling touch it first, but he immediately came to a realization. No. Since Ling took the trouble to come here from Yanjing, she must be very confident that she can get the Yi Xian sword. Don't tell me that one of her ancestors used to have the Yi Xian sword? There's no point in talking. Let's just fight. Guhan shook his head and gave up on trying to persuade her with words. Are you sure you want to play with Ling? Ling smiled contemptuously. She suddenly picked up a broken sword that was stuck in the ground and attacked Guhan. Guhan immediately grabbed the broken sword next to him. This was exactly what Guhan wanted. If they were to use a sword, Guhan did not think that anyone in this world below the age of 20 would be a match for him. Unexpectedly, just as Guhan was about to grab the broken sword, the throbbing in his heart suddenly exploded like a bomb. A suffocating feeling hundreds of times stronger than before rushed into Guhan's brain. No matter how tough Guhan's spirit was in the face of this explosion, he instantly lost consciousness and fainted on the ground. Chapter 53. TSK. He actually fainted from fright. It was obvious that Ling's swordsmanship was superb. The moment she discovered that Guhan had fainted, she easily retracted her sword and did not even touch Guhan's body. It seems like Ling's swordsmanship is getting better and better. She managed to scare this guy, who is quite skilled, into fainting with just a small sword strike. Uncle Gunia actually said that Ling's swordsmanship has not reached the next level yet. This is too much, Ling said proudly. However, where did this guy come from? He actually managed to exchange a few blows with Ling. Forget it, I don't care anymore. This guy will be Ling's follower from now on. Ling will be like her ancestor and create a follower of the 4 great swordsmen to piss Uncle Gunia off. Ling said angrily with a pout. Oh yes, I've seen it on television. You have to make sure that the enemy is not faking his death. Too many villains have been tricked like this. With this thought in mind, Ling kicked Gohan a few times, felt his pulse, and checked his pupils. After making sure that Gohan had really fainted, she threw away the broken sword in her hand. Wait, why does Ling think that she is a villain? Linling shook her head and tossed the strange question to the back of her mind. She walked up to the Xian sword again and wiped off the sand that covered the sword. The words, "The world is a public," were engraved on the sword. That's right, this was the number 1 sword in the ancient sword Dreaming Souls, the Xian sword. Xian sword, oh Xian sword. It's been 300 years, and you are finally back in the hands of the Liunian family. A shocking fact was revealed from Ling's mouth. Ling was actually a descendant of the world's most famous family, the Liunian family. It was no wonder that the staff treated Ling with such a flattering attitude. It was also no wonder that Lu Lei, who was the sword pavilion master and an immortal-level swordsman, allowed Ling to fool around. He even brought her to the sword pavilion's forbidden grounds, the sword burial grounds, and allowed her to take away the Xian sword, which had been sealed by the Sword Council. It turned out that Ling was a descendant of the Liunian family. With the Liunian family's reputation, everyone else would have to avoid Liunian Ling, except for the powerful immortal-level swordsman. Liunian Ling was Ling Ling's real name. Her ancestor was the Kanzu Fleeting Calendar, who had been cut open by Gohan and died in a dungeon. In real history, Fleeting Calendar's strength soared. He became the first savior of humanity and the first emperor-level swordsman. He was the leader of all the swordsmen, and he led humanity through one crisis after another. Among the 8 super base cities, 3 of them were created by Fleeting Year Calendar. This was a unique record. The other 5 cities were created by the other 5 Emperor-class sword-bearers. No other sword-bearer had ever built a second base city like Fleeting Year Calendar, let alone a third. After Fleeting Calendar died in battle, Fleeting Calendar's son also became an Emperor-level swordsman. The glory of 2 generations of Emperor-level swordsmen forged the world's number 1 Emperor-level family, the Liunian family. It was now the 28th generation of the Liunian family. In total, there were 6 Emperor-level swordsmen, 58 Immortal-level swordsmen, and countless spiritual swordsmen. Liunian Ling was the 29th generation descendant of the Liunian family. She was the only direct descendant of the Liunian family, and the future leader of the Liunian family. It was easy to imagine her high status and how much the family entrusted her to. Liunian Ling closed her eyes. She reached into the sandpit and slowly grasped the hilt of the Xian sword. In Liunian Ling's mind, synchronizing with the Xian sword should be a piece of cake. Other mortals only had a few tenths of a % chance of synchronizing with an innate sword maiden. However, she was the direct descendant of the Liunian family. The success rate was 100%. In the 28 generations of direct descendants, none of them had ever failed. Even the weakest of them was a spiritual sword bearer. It was impossible for Liunian Ling to fail with such a bloodline. Secondly, the Xian sword had almost become the exclusive possession of the Liunian family for a period of time. From the 2nd generation to the 20th generation, all the ancient sword maidens were Xian swords. Generations of successful bloodlines had been added to Liunian Ling's body. She never doubted that she would fail one day. However, Liunian Ling had failed unbelievably. She had been holding the Xian sword in her hand for a full 10 minutes, but the ancient sword that had been with her family for 19 generations did not move at all. It was like a piece of scrap metal that did not react at all in her hand. Liunian Ling had to admit that she was starting to panic. She could not understand why she could not succeed when even her ancestors could do it. 19 generations of ancestors had succeeded. In the 21st generation, the Xian sword was no longer in the Liunian family's possession because it had been broken in 2. It had been placed in the sword burial grounds to recover its strength and prepare to be resurrected. In reality, Liunian Ling did not think too highly of the Xian sword's strength. After all, it was only an ancient sword. No matter how strong it could not be stronger than a treasured sword, famed sword, or spiritual sword. More importantly, the Yi sword represented the family's inheritance. The sword Maiden, who had succeeded in every generation of the family's bloodline, failed in your hands. Doesn't this mean that fleeting time Lin's bloodline is no longer pure? She is not fit to be a direct descendant of the fleeting time family. After all, countless branch families had been eyeing the position of the fleeting time family's patriarch for the past 1,000 years. If this news were to spread, she would not be stripped of her position as the successor, but her reputation would definitely suffer a huge blow. This would lead to a series of disastrous consequences. Therefore, when Liuyan Ling realized that she could not synchronize with the Yi sword, she nearly broke down. Meanwhile, Gohan had slowly regained consciousness. Perhaps it was because of the explosion, but the throbbing in his heart was much lighter than before. When he regained his focus, he realized that Liuyan Ling was standing there in a daze with the Yi sword in her hand. She was silent and had a strange expression on her face, as if she had lost her mind. Not bad. Looks like she didn't succeed. Gohan smiled bitterly. If he had known that Ling could not synchronize with him, he wouldn't have fought with her. She had an extraordinary background. If she bore a grudge against him in the future, she could find an opportunity to set him up. He wouldn't be able to cry even if he wanted to. Gohan did not expect that Ling was a descendant of the Liuyan family. Otherwise, he would not have had the chance to cry. Hey! Wake up! Wake up! Gohan clutched his chest and walked to Ling's side. He waved his palm in front of her eyes. Miss Ling, since you've failed, can you let me try the Yi sword? Gohan realized that Lin Ling did not respond to him, so he decided to take action himself and take the sword from her hand. What are you trying to do? Lin Lin reacted quickly. Before Gohan's hand could even touch the Yi sword, she had already slapped him. Miss Ling, I just want to try it myself. You've failed. Gohan explained again. You baddie. You want to bully Ling too, don't you? For some reason, Ling's tears flowed down her cheeks. You baddie. Ling is crying. Ling is crying. This is the first time in my life that I've ever cried. You're trying to bully Ling even with your tears. Ling must be tired of living. Ling spouted a string of strange and illogical words. Her tears flowed uncontrollably like a waterfall. You. Gohan did not know what to do. Although he could snatch the Yi sword from Ling's hands, he could not do anything to a girl who was crying like this. After all, Gohan was a kind and lawful main character. Forget it. I'll let her cry. Since she's unable to synchronize with me, she's destined to let go of the Yi sword one day. I'll take it when that time comes. With that thought in mind, Gohan gave up on the idea of snatching the Yi sword from Ling. He began to observe the broken swords around him to kill some time and wait for Ling to stop crying. It would have been fine if he did not look, but when he did, Gohan actually discovered something strange. At the bottom of the sandpit that he and Ling dug out, there was a faint flash of light as if something was reflecting the light from the incandescent lamp. Could it be that there was another sword buried under the Yi sword? The curiosity in Gohan's heart was immediately aroused. He squatted down and prepared to continue digging in the sand. The throbbing in his heart that had calmed down suddenly shook violently again. This time, the intensity of the shaking was even stronger than before the explosion. Could it be that the leisurely celestial sword was calling out to him to stop dawdling and quickly rescue him from this woman's hands? Unfortunately, Liuyan Ling had no intention of stopping crying, so Gohan thought about it and decided to dig the sword out of the sandpit first. Unlike the Yi sword that was placed in the sandpit, this sword was erected and stuck in the sand. Only the tip of the sword was exposed, and the hilt was at least 70 to 80 centimeters deep. It would not be easy to dig out such a deep hole. As the hole deepened, the throbbing in Gohan's heart grew stronger and harder to bear. Suddenly, Gohan had a new theory. Could it be that the thing that triggered his sword affinity was not the Xian sword, but the sword that was buried even deeper? With that theory in mind, Gohan was even more eager to dig out the mysterious sword. Thus, Gohan dug for a full 10 minutes before he managed to dig out a pit that was 80 centimeters deep. Both of his palms had already been rubbed into a bloody mess by the needle-like grains of sand. When Gohan saw the back half of the sword, he had a hunch. When the entire hilt was exposed, Gohan knew what he had dug out. It was her. Chapter 54. Liu Nianling's mind was in a whirl for a long time. Suddenly, she felt a refreshing sensation rush from her palms to the top of her head. After a shudder, Liu Nianling regained her senses. At that moment, she realized that the mysterious Gohan was standing there motionlessly, as if he had turned into a statue. He's synchronizing. Liu Nianling was shocked to realize that Gohan's belly had swelled to the size of a 6-month-old. Coupled with his deathly stillness, Liu Nianling could immediately confirm that he had successfully entered the synchronizing state. Oh no, my Xian sword! Liu Nianling's first thought was that Gohan had snatched the Xian sword from her and entered the synchronizing state. However, she immediately realized that the Xian sword was still in her hand, unscathed. Strange. Judging by this person's personality, he would never randomly find an ancient sword maiden to synchronize with. But since he didn't snatch my Xian sword, could it be that there's an ancient sword maiden here that's not inferior to the Xian sword? Liu Nianling speculated in confusion. However, the 2nd to 10th sword maidens in the ancient sword records were either in another city or in the hands of the sword bearers. Where could Gohan find a sword maiden that was not inferior to the Xian sword? Liu Nianling couldn't help but be curious about the sword maiden that Gohan had synchronized with. Unfortunately, before the awakening was complete, Liu Nianling couldn't possibly know which sword maiden Gohan was synchronizing with. There was no hope for the Xian sword. The sword burial grounds, which she had spent so much effort to get to Yuzhong City's sword pavilion, was completely silent. The only person she could talk to, Gohan, had also entered the synchronizing state and turned into a zombie. This made Liu Nianling suddenly feel bored. Liu Nianling was not a girl who had nothing to do. Since she had nothing to do, she would find something to do. For example, this Gohan in front of her. How dare he try to snatch the Xian sword from her? Now that he had entered the synchronizing state without any hesitation, he must be tired of living. Gohan entering the synchronizing state in front of Liu Nianling was really reckless. As long as Liu Nianling had the slightest ill intention, she could stab Gohan with her sword. Just like how Gohan dealt with Fleeting Time Calendar in the dungeon, Gohan would be dead for sure. Fortunately, although Liu Nianling had suffered a lot from Gohan, the teachings of the Fleeting Time clan had been firmly engraved in Liu Nianling's mind. In addition, the entire human world had become unusually united due to Yuan Ko's invasion. Humans rarely hurt each other, especially sword bearers. The last sword bearer who was sentenced to be beheaded for harming his own kind had happened 50 years ago. However, Liu Nianling could not take it lying down that Gohan was trying to snatch the Xian sword from her. Moreover, she had suffered a setback from the Xian sword, so she naturally wanted to get back at Gohan. I'll draw a big turtle on your face. Liu Nianling quickly thought of a good way to take revenge on Gohan. She picked up a broken sword from the ground and pointed the tip at Gohan's face, muttering, "Take a look, Ling. Where should I start?" Oh no. It seems like Gohan, who has been disfigured in the game, is going to follow in his footsteps in real life. But in reality, it did not matter if she did not look, but when she did, Miss Ling was a little dazed. In this world, there was a kind of man's beauty that required a closer look. From a distance, Gohan's face might not seem like anything special. It was just pleasing to the eye. But if one were to look closely, one would be surprised to find that there was not a single blemish on Gohan's face. There were no spots, no blackheads, no boils. It was as perfect as a piece of fine jade. Especially now that he had fallen into a deep slumber, Gu Han's eyes were closed. He looked like a Buddha who was pinching flowers with his fingers, giving off an indescribable feeling. It went without saying, making one feel the same, and involuntarily want to fall into the rhythm of entanglement. Take Liu Yanling for example. She had completely forgotten about her plan to carve a turtle on Gohan's face. Instead, she was staring at Gohan's face like a love-struck fool, her eyes shining with a piercing light. Ling's heart seemed to have melted. "Miss Ling, it's time. I'm here to pick you up." Unknowingly, an hour had passed. Lu Lei, the master of the sword pavilion, jumped down from the entrance and landed right next to Linling, according to the previous agreement. "Miss Ling, I'm really not here at the right time," Lu Lei said with a wretched smile and a teasing tone, waking Liu Yanling from her infatuated state. Grandpa Master, when did you come?" Liu Yanling woke up from her infatuation with a blush of shame. Not long. Just when you were about to kiss him, I came just in time and disturbed Miss Linling's good time." "I'm sorry. You're so annoying, shameless old man," Ling said coquettishly. She wanted to explain, but suddenly, a thought flashed across her mind. "Grandpa Master, has it been an hour already?" The blush on Ling's face faded and was replaced by a serious expression. "Although I'm a little old, I'm not so old that I can't remember the time. It's been exactly an hour now." "That's strange. I clearly remember that it's only been 40 minutes since I woke up from my confusion and realized that this fellow had entered the synchronized state. But now that an hour has passed, why is he still in the synchronized state?" Ling's face was full of confusion. "Miss Ling, you mean that this child has already been synchronized for 20 minutes? Lu Lei, the old man, revealed an expression of disbelief for the first time. "If my memory isn't broken, the longest synchronization time for an ancient sword maiden shouldn't be more than 4 minutes. According to the common knowledge of every sword wielder, the synchronization time of each level of sword maiden was limited to a certain range. As the weakest sword wielder, the synchronization time for an ancient sword maiden was between 2 to 4 minutes. For example, the synchronization time for the 3 beginner sword maidens was exactly 3 minutes. The sword maiden, which was 1 level higher, needed between 4 to 7 minutes. The famous sword maiden, which was 1 level higher, only needed around 8 to 15 minutes. However, this solid Han had actually synchronized for a full 20 minutes. This was the time that the sword maiden of the spiritual sword maiden needed. Don't tell me that this child has synchronized with a spiritual sword maiden. Lu Lei muttered to himself. How is that possible? Ling rolled her eyes at Lu Lei. The first time my ancestor synchronized with a sword maiden, it was only a famous sword maiden. Can this fellow be more powerful than my ancestor? If he's really that powerful, wouldn't you have roped him into the council long ago? Would I even have the chance to meet him? That's strange. Miss Linlin is very knowledgeable. Do you know which ancient sword rank sword mistress would need such a long time? Lu Lei countered. Are you kidding me? If I'm from a knowledgeable family, I wouldn't need him to help me cheat. Ling covered her mouth. Oh no, I've let the cat out of the bag. I didn't know that Miss Ling had such a trick up her sleeve. I'll have to talk to your father about this. Lu Lei was about to tease the young lady from an extraordinary family. He was almost 100 years old, and he might not have the chance to tease the heir of Lu Lei's family anymore. At this time, Gu Han's stomach, which had been silent all this time, began to emit a strong light. Miss Linlin, your family is very knowledgeable. Do you know the origin of this lady? Lu Lei took out his presbyopic glasses from his dimensional pocket and wiped them several times before putting them on his nose solemnly. He carefully sized up the silent Lolita Feng Jianyang in front of him. Truth be told, Lu Lei had lived for almost 100 years. He had even seen a few immortal sword maidens. Moreover, after his retirement as the Yuzhang Sword Tower Master, He had flipped through almost all the information on Sword Maidens dozens of times. But in his memory, he could not find any impression of this Sword Maiden before him. This Sword Lady was the Sword Lady that popped out of Gu Han's stomach. She was less than 80 centimeters tall and had a head of perfectly straight black hair that extended all the way to her ankles. If it was any longer, it would probably touch the ground. Her expression was cold, and she seemed no different from a dead person if she stood still. However, her eyes were unusually bright, so bright that a normal person would fall into an endless mental maze. Although the Sword Maiden had the body of a lowly, the proportions of her body were abnormally perfect. Even though she was only 1.4 meters tall, she gave off the feeling of a mature girl. Her chest, in particular, was already rising and falling. It was easy to predict that her size would be shocking when she grew up. Of course, looks were not important. What was important was that even Lu Lei, the old man who managed the sword pavilion, could not recognize this Sword Maiden. Completely. No. Information. Chapter 55. Her name is Qinpin Sword. What's so strange about that? Guhan, who had recovered from his petrified state, smiled warmly and caressed Qinpin Sword's smooth, black head. He was very surprised as well. He did not expect to find Qinpin Sword in the Sword Burial Grounds, the ancient Sword Lady in the game. What was even more unbelievable was that Qinpin Sword, who could not transform into a Sword Lady in the game, had successfully transformed into a Sword Lady in real life. Guhan thought that it would be sealed in real life just like in the game. Lu Lei and Liuyan Ling looked at each other and then went back to their own work. Old man Lu Lei entered the database on his personal terminal and searched for information on Qinpin Sword. Liuyan Ling tried her best to recall her memory because she vaguely remembered hearing this name before. The first to find something was the Sword Tower Master, Lu Lei. Lu Lei looked through all the information on sword ladies in the Sword Tower's network, but he could not find a single word about Qinpin Sword. However, when he looked through the circulating information in the Sword Burial Grounds, he made an unexpected discovery. He found information on Qinpin Sword in 2120. That year was the 60th year of the founding of Yuzhang City, and also the first year of the Sword Burial Grounds. Qinpin Sword was sent into the Sword Burial Grounds with the first batch of broken sword ladies. It could be said that it was the oldest sword lady in the Sword Burial Grounds. Yuzhang City was a base city established by another Emperor Sword-level powerhouse in the same era as the Sword Ancestor. When Yuzhang City was founded 60 years ago, that Emperor Sword rank expert was also old and passed away a few years later. The Sword Burial Grounds was the last mysterious area that he left behind for Yuzhang City. The question was, why would the Emperor Sword-level elite who had founded Yuzhang City purposely place an obscure sword that did not even have a single character written on it into the Sword Burial Ground? According to the information, the 108 broken swords that had been placed into the Sword Burial Grounds at the same time as the Qinpin Sword were all named sword ladies with historical records. Only the Qinpin Sword stood alone. That's right, this young man named Guhan actually knew the name of the Qinpin Sword. This was not normal. He had a lot of information on him, and he had found the name from the circulating information of the Sword Burial Grounds that had not been leaked. How did he know? The best way was to take the initiative to ask Guhan about the Qinpin Sword. But I'm your senior, the pavilion master who managed the sword pavilion. If others found out that I asked a young man for information on the Sword Maiden, would I, Lu Lei, still have any face left? Although his old face didn't have many years left to live. Young man, let me test you. Do you know the origin of the Qinpin Sword? Lu Lei was indeed a sly old fox who had lived for almost 100 years. He immediately thought of a devious idea. He acted like he was testing a young man. Who would have guessed that this old senior would know nothing about his question? Guhan was still too young and fell into his trap. He answered honestly, the Qinpin sword was forged in an unknown era. It was originally a half-sword lady. It was the square dance sword of Lord Fleeting Time Calendar's grandmother in Kanzu. According to the details in the Sword Maiden Online's Yuan Gojian Sword Instance Dungeon, this sword was passed down to Lord Kanzu, and he hung it on the wall of his bedroom. After the apocalypse, Lord Fleeting Time Calendar went to the museum to look for his mother. He left this sword in his room, and there was no news of it ever since. Not bad. Not bad. Lu Lei kept nodding as if he already knew what was going on. However, his mind was racing as he analyzed the information he got from Gohan. I didn't expect the information of the Qinpin sword to be stored in the game. No wonder I couldn't find the Qinpin sword in the Sword Garrett's database. It's no wonder. When Bat developed the Sword Maiden Online, they filtered through all the information in the world. It's not surprising that some of the information was found by Bat and edited into the background of the instance dungeon. I remember that the items in the Honest supermarket were found by Lord Kanzu himself. The Qinpin sword was probably found at that time and given to the Emperor sword wielder who founded Yuzhong City. Right, the Qinpin sword was originally a half-sword lady. That Emperor sword threw her into the sword burial grounds, hoping that she could evolve into a real sword lady. That must be it. I, Lu Lei, am indeed old but strong. Bah, I'm old but sly. Bah, I'm old but strong. Based on Gohan's few words, Lu Lei quickly thought of the origin of the poor sword, which he thought was flawless. Needless to say, this purely imaginative story was 70% close to the truth, but the most crucial 30% was 1,000 miles off. Fortunately, Lu Lei didn't know what the 30% meant when he died. Otherwise, he wouldn't have died so peacefully. On the other side, Liuyan Ling didn't know what expression to use to face the Sword Maiden, Qinpin sword. She couldn't figure out which Sword Maiden it was after thinking for a long time. This lowly was actually something from her ancestors, a Sword Maiden passed down by her ancestors. As this explosive news exploded in her head, Liuyan Ling finally recalled where she had heard of the Qinpin sword's name. When she was around 5 years old, there had been a series of earthquakes in her family's ancestral land. When Uncle Gunia had carried her to hide from the earthquakes, he had said something with a strange expression on his face. Is the Qinpin sword still alive? Now that Liuyan Ling thought about it, she could see fear, hesitation, sorrow, worry, joy, guilt, and many other expressions on Uncle Gunia's face at the same time. It seems like I have to report this news to my family. As she recalled this, Liuyan Ling felt that the Qinpin sword's appearance wasn't that simple. She had to report this news to her family. By the way, Miss Ling, could it be that you haven't found the Yixian sword yet? At this moment, Lu Lei suddenly remembered something important. He had been so focused on the Qinpin sword that he hadn't noticed that Liuyan Ling's Sword Maiden was not by his side. I found it. Ling waved the Yixian sword in her hand with a cold expression, but it seems like Ling has made a wasted trip. So it didn't work. Lu Lei stroked his white beard. That's not surprising. After what the Yixian sword has experienced, it's only natural that it doesn't want to synchronize with you. I say, your family's obsession is too deep. Why do you insist on holding onto the Yixian sword? Isn't it better to let her go? I want freedom too. Who will give me freedom? Ling rolled her eyes at Lu Lei. I'm sorry, Pavilion Master. I'll be taking the Yixian sword back with me. If you have any objections, you're welcome to complain to the council. Take it. I'll pretend that the sword never existed. Lu Lei waved his hand. He was about to die, and there was no need for him to offend the Lu family. Even if he reported it to the council, they might not even remember him. What was the point? This sword is very painful. Suddenly, a voice that sounded like the winter wind in January rang out. It came from the lowly girl in Gohan's arms. Her expression was solemn and serious. She wants to say something, but Qingpin can't hear her clearly. You can hear the Yi sword? Lu Lei narrowed his eyes. That's impossible. The Yi sword is in a long slumber. She's really speaking. Listen if you don't believe me. Qingpin was still very serious. Haha. I'm old and my ears aren't good. I can't hear clearly. Lu Lei's old face scrunched up together. This poor empress, how can I make you hear me clearly? Come closer. Let me touch her. Qingpin patted Guhan's arm with her little hand. Guhan understood and carried her to Liu Nianling's side. Qingpin reached out with her little hand and touched the Yi sword. She closed her eyes and pouted a few times, the baby fat on her face rippling. She's very angry. She's decided to come out. What? What does that mean? Linling was stunned. Right at this moment, she suddenly felt the sword essence within her body surge madly towards the leisurely immortal sword. At this moment, the leisurely immortal sword blossomed with resplendent light. The Yi sword was synchronizing with Liu Nianling. After holding the sword for 40 minutes without any reaction, they were suddenly synchronizing. Senior Cloud Sky. Isn't that normal? Gu Han gulped as he looked at Fleeting Time's synchronized state. It's normal for him to be delayed for tens of minutes. Fleeting Time's eyes widened. Lu Lei stammered for a long time, but he couldn't come up with a reason. The few things that happened today nearly overturned his lifetime of experience and common sense. In the end, Lu Lei could only point at Liu Nianling helplessly and say, "Young man, you can't use common sense to look at their family matters. There aren't many normal people in their family. I'm going to kill you. You're always pestering me. Pestering me. Ruining me. Ruining me. I'm going to kill all of you." Yi Xian, who was dressed in a red qipao, raised the Yi Xian sword and pointed it at Liu Nianling's head. Guhan could hear endless resentment and grief in her words. By the way, Guhan seemed to have seen this scene somewhere before. Chapter 56. Pavilion Lord, may I ask what happened? Gu Han pointed at Yi Xian, who was filled with resentment, and asked Lu Lei respectfully. Lu Lei looked at Guhan in surprise and patted Guhan's shoulder politely. Don't you know the whole story? Why did you barge into the sword burial grounds without knowing the whole story? Little fellow, I have high hopes for you. Alright, it's best that you don't know. Little fellow, since you're not in their circle, you shouldn't know about it. Otherwise, you'll regret it. Lu Lei shook his head. Just like what he said, it was for Guhan's own good that he did not tell Guhan. If Guhan knew something that he should not know, he would only get into trouble. Thank you for your teachings, Senior. Guhan bowed at Lu Lei. Since Lu Lei was unwilling to tell him, there was no reason for him to ask. Meanwhile, the confrontation between the Yi Xian sword and Liu Nianling was still ongoing. Liu Nianling's face turned pale as she faced the Yi Xian sword's overwhelming resentment. Liu Nianling felt ashamed when she recalled the foolish and absurd actions of her family in the past. Even though it happened hundreds of years ago, she was the one who inherited the Liu family's bloodline. She had no choice but to take the blame for what happened back then. Forget it. It's our family's fault. Liu Nianling did something that shocked Guhan and Lu Lei. Liu Nianling bent her knees and knelt in front of the Yi Xian sword. It's our family's fault, but there's no turning back. I'm kneeling before Lady Yi Xian today, and I sincerely beg for Lady Yi Xian's forgiveness for the mistakes we've made back then. Liu Nianling no longer had the mischievous vibe she had before. It was replaced by solemnity and remorse. This girl. She's amazing. Seeing Liu Nianling kneel, Lu Lei sighed in admiration. I can't believe that I'll be able to see them kneel to someone else in my life. My life isn't in vain. In the face of Lu Lei's praise, Guhan did not speak. He wanted to know if Yi Xian would forgive Liu Nianling. Difficult. As if hearing the question in his master's heart, Qingpin suddenly said, "The anger in her heart is rippling, she is going to make a move. Are the knees of Lu Nian's family still so precious?" You actually think that by kneeling down, you can redeem the sins you committed? Yi Xian screamed mournfully. I want you to lie in the grave for 300 years. This angry howl officially opened Yi Xian's battle to kill her master. That's right, this was a battle to kill its master, and also a battle of suicide. Liu Ling had become the master of the Yi Xian sword. If the Yi Xian sword were to attack Liu Ling, it would be an act of murdering its master. If the sword succeeded in murdering its master, the sword maiden's body would instantly disintegrate into metal powder, and all traces of her would disappear. In history, there were only 7 cases of sword maidens successfully murdering their masters, and none of these sword maidens had ever appeared in this world again. Yi Xian's qipao was pressed tightly against her thighs, revealing the perfect curves of her thighs. As expected of the sword mother, Yi Xian, who was known as the most beautiful woman in ancient sword dreaming souls. Wait, I've gone off topic. Let's watch the battle again. Without a doubt, Yi Xian, who was filled with resentment, chose to attack first. Her first attack was aimed at Fleeting Time Ling's vitals. If Fleeting Time Ling were to land a direct hit on Fleeting Time Ling, he would definitely die. Of course, Liu Ling did not want to die. Helpless against Yi Xian's killer move, she could only pull out a broken sword from the desert and block Yi Xian's attack. Clang! Yi Xian's broken sword flew out of her hand, and she flew more than 10 meters away, stirring up a cloud of dust. Oh no! Lu Lei panicked when he saw that the fight had really begun. Although the Lu Nian family was the world's #1 aristocratic family, and had killed countless Yuan Ko, and possessed an entire library of secret techniques, Liu Ling was still immortal. Although she had become an ancient sword wielder, the one who wanted to kill her was her only sword maiden. If the sword maiden was in her hands, with the Lu Nian family's foundation, Liu Ling would not be afraid of Yi Xian. Since ancient times, few mortals had a good ending against the sword maiden's treasured sword with their mortal bodies. What's wrong? Are the people of the Lu Nian family so weak? They can't even withstand a single strike from Yi Xian? The Yi Xian sword sneered. That person back then was much stronger than you. Yi Xian, please listen to me. Our family knows that we are in the wrong, Fleeting Ling still wanted to explain, but Yi Xian did not give her a chance. Yi Xian immediately followed up with another killing move. Liu Ling had no choice but to pick up another broken sword from the ground to block the sharpness of the Yi Xian sword. However, she could only block it for a moment. Just like before, Liu Ling let go of the broken sword in her hand, and she was sent flying more than 10 meters away. This cycle continued for 5 or 6 times. Although Liu Ling managed to block Yi Xian's attack in time, anyone with a discerning eye could see that Liu Ling's body was almost depleted. Her perlicue was bleeding from the impact, and her reflexes and strength were getting weaker and weaker. At this rate, it was only a matter of time before Ling Fleeting Time died under Yi Xian's sword due to exhaustion. Oh no! Oh no! Lu Lei was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. As he turned, he said, "My sword ladies are not by my side. What should I do? What should I do?" Sword maidens were not willing to exist in their sword form unless they were in battle. As long as they were within 100 kilometers of their wielder, they could move, play, or even go shopping. For example, at this time, Lu Lei's ancient sword tier sword mistress was with her younger sisters in a shopping mall in Yuzhong City, which was 60 to 70 kilometers away from Lu Lei. Just now, Lu Lei had transmitted his voice through the sword mark, telling his sword lady to put down everything she was doing and quickly return to his side. However, this required time. Before the sword lady returned, Lu Lei was just an old man with a strong body. He would not be of any use. I can't let Fleeting Time's girl die here. I'll be spending my remaining years in peace if I do. Lu Lei muttered to himself beside Gohan. It'd be great if there's an ancient sword maiden here. Why did the ancestors install a personal terminal shielding system here? There are so many of our men out there, and we can't even contact a single one of them. Lu Lei glanced at Gahan from the corner of his eyes and was overjoyed. I must be getting old. Isn't there a ready-made ancient sword maiden here? Gahan felt a chill run down his spine. He could sense that something was staring at him. Hey kid, hurry up and rush up. Lu Lei rushed behind Gahan and shouted at him. What do you mean? Gahan was stunned. What's going on? Wasn't I supposed to just watch the show? There's no time to explain. Go up there now. Lu Lei gave Gahan's butt a kick, and sent Gahan flying towards Liuyan Ling. Judging from the strength of this kick, this Lu Lei was not an ordinary person. Are you here to save me? Fleeting Time blushed when he saw Gahan pouncing on him without any regard for his own safety. At least this guy still has some conscience. He's trying to save me. That's right. I'm here to save you. Gahan seemed to have forgotten that he was the one who was kicked in here. He shamelessly admitted that he was here to save Liuyan Ling. The reason why Gahan admitted to it was simple. He had heard the name of the Liuyan family from Yi Xian. Coupled with the identity of the previous owners of the Yi Xian sword, even a fool could guess that Liuyan Ling was a descendant of the Liuyan family. If he saved Liuyan Ling's life, wouldn't the Liuyan family owe him a huge favor? Gahan was not a pedantic person. He was already an ancient sword maiden anyway. With his skills and Qing Pin's sword, he would not need much effort to suppress the Yi Xian sword. If he could get a favor from the Liuyan family so easily, why not? However, before he did it himself, Gahan still wanted to confirm something. I'll leave everything to you, Qing Pin. Gahan bowed to Qing Pin's sword. He picked up the heavily injured Liuyan Ling and retreated to the back, leaving Qing Pin's sword alone to face the enraged Yi Xian sword. Cough cough, no one looked down on Gahan's actions, because in everyone's view of the world, it was only natural for a sword maiden to fight at the front, and a sword wielder to command from the back. After all, 99% of the sword maidens did not have close combat abilities. They would only be a burden to the sword maidens on the front lines. Little sister, please step aside. Yi Xian's hatred was only directed at the members of the Liuyan family. Therefore, she still retained a shred of rationality when facing Qing Pin. She did not want to hurt the seemingly weak ancient sword maiden. Gahan, please, Qing Pin. Qing Pin cannot back down. Qing Pin clenched her fist, and Qing Pin's sword appeared in her hand. Qing Pin has learned his lesson. If that's the case, don't blame me for hurting you. Yi Xian glared at Yi Xi, and a murderous aura burst forth from her. The battle between the two sword maidens was about to begin. How strong are you, Qing Pin? Gahan thought to himself. The sword maiden form of Qing Pin's sword in the game had been sealed. He could only use Qing Pin's swordsmanship in real life to estimate her strength and background. Chapter 57. Ah, she's flying. Qing Pin's petite body drew a flying arc in the sky and landed perfectly on Gahan's back. In less than 3 seconds, Qing Pin's sword failed magnificently. The exact process was like this. Yi Xian attacked with her sword and Qing Pin swung his sword to block. Unfortunately, Qing Popper was swinging his sword towards the sky, while Yi Xian was stabbing towards his chest. Thus, Qing Popper was naturally stabbed by the Yi Xian sword. He was sent flying by the tremendous force attached to the sword and crashed back onto Gahan's body. This sword maiden doesn't know any sword techniques at all. Liuyan Ling could tell at a glance that Qing Pin's sword was swung randomly just now. It was like a child swinging a stick randomly. There was no order to it. If it wasn't for Qing Pin's protection, that sword would have pierced a bowl-sized hole in it. Brother Gahan, as a sword maiden, don't you know any sword techniques? Liuyan Ling was puzzled. Qing Pin doesn't know any sword techniques when fighting. Qing Pin climbed up from Gahan's body and coolly stomped a few times to wipe the dust off his feet onto Gahan's shirt. Then, he waved Qing Pin's sword and took the initiative to attack Yi Xian. You guys hold on. My Zhan Long will be here in 8 minutes. Old man Lu Lei shouted energetically. Zhan Long was his sword maiden. He had already put down the goods he had painstakingly bought and rushed back to the sword burial grounds with all his might. However, he didn't know if Liu Yanling could hold on for 8 minutes. At least, looking at how Qingpin was sent flying by Yi Xian for the 3rd time, it would be difficult for him to hold on. After Qingpin was sent flying by Yi Xian for the 4th time, Gohan could basically confirm that Qingpin's sword really didn't know any sword techniques, just like Kanzu's Gojian sword of the King of Yu. Every sword maiden was born with one or several sets of sword technique. For example, the cast cloud iron sword, as Yun Tianhao's sword, was born with the cast cloud sword technique. The Yi Xian, as Sun Yixian's sword, was born with the great cannon sword technique. He was born with a set of king surpassing sword technique. However, because he was the first to awaken it, his mind was a little muddled and he forgot his own sword technique. As for Qingpin Jian, she didn't seem to know any swordsmanship at all. Even if she was a public square dancer, she should at least know some swordsmanship. However, it made no difference whether he knew the square dance swordsmanship or not. Fine, since I can't test it out, it's my turn to do it myself. With this in mind, Gohan decided to let Qingpin put away his sword and go into battle himself to deal with this crazy eerie immortal. Wait! Liu Yanling suddenly tugged on Gohan's sleeve. Don't let Qingpin fight anymore. If she does, her shield will be broken. Liu Yanling's expression was a little sad. Such a cute and pitiful little girl. She was sent flying again and again to protect me. I really don't want to watch this anymore. It seems that I have to take a risk. For example, nurture a temporary sword master. I don't plan to let Qingpin fight anymore. Gohan patted Qingpin's head with a serious expression. She's worked hard enough. It's my turn now. I didn't expect you to have such courage. Liu Yanling revealed an expression of admiration when she heard that Gohan was going to fight for his life. She didn't know how to convince Gohan, but she didn't expect him to bring it up himself. Fine. Since he has such courage, why should I be stingy with the techniques of the Liu family? At this moment, Yi Xian, who had finished off Qingpin, aimed her sword at Liu Yanling and Gohan, who were lying on the ground. You only have 1 minute. You must remember these 5 sword techniques. At this critical moment, Liu Yanling's personal terminal touched Gohan's. The moment Gohan heard the notification from his gadget, you have received information from an external terminal. Do you wish to enter it? Fleeting time pushed Gohan away. I can only buy you 1 minute. My life is in your hands. With that, Liu Yanling struggled to get up from the ground. She pulled out a broken sword from the ground and fought with Yi Xian. 1 minute. Does she think she can resist for another minute? The corner of Gohan's mouth twitched. She's overestimating herself. She can only hold on for 40 seconds at most. Although he didn't know why Liu Yanling wanted to buy him 1 minute, the answer to the question must be in the information that Liu Yanling had just sent to him. Gohan immediately transferred the information into his consciousness. It was then that he realized that the information was actually a set of sword techniques, a set of 5 sword technique. From Gohan's point of view as a swordsman, the 5 sword techniques were really crude and simple. They were just some basic sword techniques that couldn't be pieced together. Each of them had a lot of loopholes. The only advantage was that they were easy to learn and master. However, when the 5 sword techniques were combined, it was very impressive. Different combinations of sword techniques could make up for the loopholes between the sword technique. Moreover, different combinations of sword techniques could be used to deal with different types of enemies who were proficient in different attacking methods. When practiced to the point of mastery, this set of sword techniques would not be inferior to the exclusive sword techniques of those martial arts sects in the Middle Ages. Thinking of this, Gohan understood Liu Yanling's idea. It turned out that she was counting on him to remember these 5 sword techniques and then use the Qingpin sword to resist Yi Xian's offensive. This Liuyan Ling actually planned to temporarily train Gohan into a sword master and let Gohan use the Qing Pin sword in the form of a sword to fight. Let Gohan compete with Yi Xian in sword techniques. Logically speaking, when the Qing Pin sword was in the hand of the sword wielder, Gohan's physical fitness could be improved to the same level as the Qing Pin sword's physical fitness. In this way, in terms of brute force, he wouldn't lose to Yi Xian. Moreover, Yi Xian's swordsmanship wasn't very good. After all, she learned the cannon sword technique from Sun Depeo. She didn't need to practice to the point of mastery of this set of sword technique. As long as she was proficient in the moves, she would be able to fight evenly with Yi Xian. But the problem was, if Liuyan Ling casually found someone to try and practice a completely unfamiliar set of sword techniques to the point of mastery in a minute, Gohan would twist his own head off and let her kick it like a ball. In a minute, any genius who had never come into contact with sword techniques and had reached the level of genius like Gohan could at most completely memorize the move. What are you still dawdling for? Quickly practice. Liuyan Ling, who was trying hard to resist Yi Xian and was already covered in blood, discovered that after 20 seconds, Gohan was still foolishly in the same place. She immediately shouted at him in anger. Gohan didn't know what to say. With his 12 years of swordsmanship foundation and peerless talent here, how could it take a minute? In 10 seconds, Gohan only needed to go through it in his mind once, and he would practice this set of sword techniques to the point of mastery. However, it wasn't good for him to expose his strength. Since Liuyan Ling was fighting desperately there, he had to make her feel better. Therefore, Gohan just stood in the same place, pretending to be clumsy, and practiced the 5 moves of the sword technique. Ba, this guy isn't a fool. Seeing the way Gohan practiced the sword, Liuyan Ling breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't expect this guy to be so talented. Although the sword techniques were clumsy and there were a lot of mistakes, they were decent. There was already 70% to 80% similarity, and it could be used in actual combat. Liuyan Ling relaxed in her heart, and the sword momentum in her hand also loosened. Immediately, Yi Xian found an opportunity to break through the defense of Liuyan Ling's sword technique, and attacked her lower abdomen, directly stabbing a sword wound the size of a ping-pong ball. Liuyan Ling groaned and fell heavily to the ground. The bones in her whole body seemed to fall apart, and she could no longer exert any strength. She could only close her eyes and wait for death. From the time she pushed Gohan away to the time she fell to the ground and waited for death, just 40 seconds had passed. Haha, I actually overestimated myself. That kid is probably still practicing the sword technique. Forget it, I can only use that thing. Liuyan Ling's consciousness entered the multidimensional bag, intending to use something that she brought out from her family. However, once she used that thing, the entire sword burial ground would probably be destroyed. Yi Xian, your opponent is me. Just when Liuyan Ling was about to use that thing, a loud shout rescued her. She didn't know when, but Gohan had actually held the Qingpin sword in his hand and stood in front of her. Have you learned the 5 fleeting time styles? Liuyan Ling asked in surprise. No, but I've barely memorized it. Gohan answered very modestly. He didn't just memorize the moves, he could already improve these moves. It's enough to memorize it. Liuyan Ling said quickly, now listen to my command. You will use whatever move I tell you to use. Understand? You must listen to my commands. Understood. Gohan's heart was clear, and the doubts in his heart were finally completely resolved. So this was Liuyan Ling's plan. Any novice ancient sword master who had only memorized the moves would not be able to fight against Yi Xian, who was proficient in the cannon sword technique. However, if there was someone who was proficient enough in the sword technique to command this novice ancient sword master, it would be a different situation. As long as this prodigy was obedient enough, it would not be difficult to stop Yi Xian. By the way, the Liuyan family was also known as the Sword Master family. No matter how low the achievements of the previous family heads were, their attainments in the sword technique were still among the best. Seeing Gohan's somewhat lifeless face, Liu Ling thought that he was afraid, so she said gently, "Don't worry, Ling is a powerful sword master. As long as you listen to Ling's command, you will definitely be able to last until the Dragon Slayer Queen arrives." Hearing Liu Ling's words, Gohan's facial muscles began to twitch. This situation was too interesting. He actually needed someone else to teach him sword techniques, even if she was from the Lunyan family. This was too interesting. Chapter 58. The bloodline of the Liu family is really regressing. Do you really think that a mere mortal who has just become a sword wielder can defeat me, Yi-Xian? Yi-Xian brandished her sword. Human, I don't want to hurt you. This is a grudge between me and the Liu family. Get out of my way. Since I, Gohan, am standing here, I won't leave. Cut the crap and make your move. Gohan's tone was firm as he said this. Then, he displayed the starting stance of the first move of the 5 fleeting time styles. Obviously, he had decided to fight to the end with Yi-Xian. Liu Ling was touched by Gohan's words. She felt that she had not misjudged Gohan. With his stubbornness, he would definitely become an outstanding sword wielder in the future. This little fellow has made a huge profit. Lu Lei, who was watching from the side, took out an opium pipe from his pocket and lit it up with trembling hands. If I were 70 years younger, I wouldn't have given such a good opportunity to you. Regardless of Lu Lei's thoughts, Yi-Xian was angered by Gohan's attitude. Facing a newbie like Gohan, she immediately used a killing move. She aimed at Gohan's armpit. If this move connected, he might still be alive, but his arm would basically be crippled. Her target is your armpit. Use the third stance, sorrow of parting. Liu Ling, who was lying on the ground, gave the order that she thought was the most correct. I think it's better to use the 5th stance. Although the 3rd stance can indeed block Yi-Xian's attack, if I use the 5th stance, I can still attack Yi-Xian's wrist. Gohan did not think much of it. This Liu Ling was also a half-baked person. She had not even fully grasped the 5 forms of fleeting time, and yet she still had the cheek to order me around. Although he was disdainful, Gohan still chose to listen to Liu Ling's instructions. The first move was Sorrow of Parting. In order to show that he had really just learned this move, Gohan even deliberately used the move in a stiff and inflexible manner. But even so, it was just enough to block the Yi-Xian sword's first attack. This brat's moves are all over the place, but he's actually able to utilize the Sorrow of Separation. Fleeting Time's Cold, who had witnessed Gohan's first use of a sword technique, was shocked. Although he had successfully learned the secret voice transmission technique, Liu Ling had already confirmed that Gohan had outstanding martial arts talent and a certain level of martial arts foundation when they fought over the Yi-Xian sword. That was why she had taken a gamble and taught the 5 forms of fleeting time to Gohan. However, in Liu Ling's heart, she did not expect more than 30% of Gohan to be able to successfully learn the 5 forms of fleeting time. After all, he only had a minute to learn it, which was the best of the best. Isn't this guy's talent a little too terrifying? Liu Ling thought to herself. Of course, this guy's talent is not as good as mine, but at least he is much better than those brats from the subsidiary sections. Go to hell. Yi-Xian's sword was blocked by Gohan, a newcomer who didn't seem to know anything. The anger in Yi-Xian's heart exploded. The slender Yi-Xian sword in his hand instantly turned into a vicious viper as it continuously launched fierce attacks at Gohan. I can't cut it. It's the sorrow of separation. In the heart. I can't cut it. It's messy. Another feeling, I can't cut it. It's the sorrow of separation. It's the sorrow of separation. It's the sorrow of separation. In the heart. This was the name of the 5 sword techniques of the 5 forms of fleeting time, which were passed down by Liu Ling's ancestors. In the face of Yi Xian's tide-like attacks, Liu Ling could only respond with a series of moves. However, she was extremely worried because she knew that a newbie like Gohan, who had just learned the 5 forms of fleeting time, would definitely not be able to keep up with the speed of her moves. Liu Ling secretly put her hand into her dimensional pocket and held onto her life-saving item. If she discovered that Gohan's life was in danger, she would immediately use the item. Even if she had to destroy the entire sword burial ground, she had to protect this man who was standing in front of her. To Liu Ling's surprise, Gohan was actually able to keep up with the speed of her moves. In the beginning, the connection of the moves was a little difficult and stiff, but after a dozen moves, it was no longer possible to tell that Gohan was a newbie who had just come into contact with sword technique. The connection of the moves was so smooth that it could not be cut off. Moreover, after Gohan used this move, it was more accurate and precise than before. The stiffness, loopholes, and weaknesses had all disappeared after a few times. Gohan was like a veteran who had practiced the 5 forms of fleeting time for several years. Every move was gradually perfected. This Gohan. Is he still human? Liu Ling was so shocked that she could not close her mouth. When she first practiced the 5 forms of fleeting time, it took her a total of 3 hours to reach this level. But this Gohan? From the moment he received the 5 forms of fleeting time until now, it had not even been 3 minutes, and he had already surpassed a day's worth of effort. Could it be that this person's talent in swordsmanship is even higher than mine? This thought suddenly appeared in Liu Ling's mind. In her world, in her family, if she needed to spend 3 days to learn something, no one could learn it in 10 days. Even her father admitted that he was not as talented as Liu Ling when he was young. He admitted that Liu Ling was one of the top 10 geniuses in the history of the Fleeting Time family. As time went by, Liu Ling really thought that she was the #1 genius in the world. But she never expected that the person she had randomly found to cheat for her would have a talent that surpassed her in swordsmanship. This caused Liu Ling's worldview to collapse, and she felt terrible. There's no need to belittle yourself, Miss Ling. Lu Lei stood beside Fleeting Time Ling and comforted him. My 100 years of experience have taught me that a person's potential can be unleashed at a moment of life and death. It can even be 100 times stronger than usual. If Miss Ling was in a life-and-death situation, you wouldn't be any worse than this kid. What Lu Lei meant was that Gohan had only learned so quickly because he was in a life-and-death situation. In fact, his talent was not that high, at least not higher than Liu Ling's. Really? Hearing Lu Lei's words, Liu Ling suddenly felt much better. Absolutely. Lu Lei nodded. However, this kid's talent is indeed terrifyingly strong. TSK, I really don't know why the teachers in those schools let go of such a diamond in the rough. Miss Lin, you might not know, but our Yuzhong Academy has always been at the bottom of the Swordsman's Cup for the past few years. Looks like we won't have to worry about the ancient sword group this year. Old man Lu Lei sniggered. What? What do you mean your Yuzhong University won't have to worry? Ling spat on the ground. My Liunian clan has taken a liking to this person. He'll be a member of our Liunian clan in the future. What has it got to do with your Yuzhong University? Sigh. You can't say that. He's a child born and raised in our Yuzhong city. Naturally, he belongs to our Yuzhong University. Why should he join your Liunian clan? Lu Lei blew at his white beard in dissatisfaction. I, Liu Ling, am the future family head of the Liunian clan. If I say he belongs to our Liunian clan, then he belongs to our Liunian clan. Ling retorted without backing down. Haha, that's not right. Miss Ling, you're not the family head yet. How can you decide the matters of the clan so domineeringly? Moreover, this Gohan doesn't have the bloodline of the Liunian clan. He can't possibly join your Liunian clan. So what if he doesn't have the bloodline of our Liunian clan? Ling grew anxious. What? What will I do to him? Lu Lei narrowed his eyes as he stared at fleeting Time Ling with a mischievous expression. Are you trying to recruit him into your fleeting time clan to be your son-in-law? Who's going to recruit him? Ling blurted out in a panic. Oh, that's right, I'll take him in as my disciple, a personal disciple. That should be fine, right? Disciple. Lu Lei was stunned for a moment before bursting into laughter. That's right. Personal disciples can indeed join the Lionian clan. How could I, Lu Lei, have forgotten about this? Miss Ling, you've really thought this through. For some reason, the words "thought through" sounded especially piercing to Lionian Ling's ears. Wait, did I forget something? Lionian Ling, who had been speaking with Lu Lei for a long time, suddenly felt that she had missed something. She couldn't figure it out no matter how hard she thought about it. She only slapped her thigh when she heard a miserable groan. Oh no, I forgot to instruct Gohan on which moves to use. That groan just now couldn't have been that idiot Gohan's, could it? Idiot Gohan, please don't hold a grudge against me. It's all because of that old coffin Lu Lei that I was distracted. Please don't die. Liunian Ling hurriedly raised her head to look at the battlefield. Aya, what's going on? Why is Gohan sitting on my sword mistress's stomach? What kind of weird position is this? Can someone explain it to me? Chapter 59. Please be quiet, Lady Xian. Gohan used a very ambiguous posture and rode on Xian's belly. His left knee pressed on Xian's plump and soft chest. Don't get me wrong, Gohan didn't have any bad intentions. However, Gohan didn't intend to break Xian's protective shield and then use direct damage to make Xian lose her ability to fight. Only by using this method of complete suppression could he control Xian so that she couldn't launch any more attack. Miss Ling, come here quickly, I can't suppress her anymore. Gohan shouted loudly. He had exhausted all the strength in his body to suppress Xian, who was constantly struggling and twisting. If it wasn't for Qing Pin's sword in his hand and his own physical fitness, Gohan definitely wouldn't be able to suppress Xian. Oh! Liunian Ling dragged the wounds on her body and half-crawled and half-walked to Gohan's side. As soon as she saw the target of her resentment, Xian struggled even more and almost pushed Gohan off her body. How could this be? Without my command, how did you? Liunian Ling asked incredulously, but before she could finish her question, she was directly interrupted by Gohan. There's no time to explain, Miss Ling. Quickly return Xian to the sword. I really can't suppress it anymore. Gohan's forehead was sweating, and it seemed that the situation was really bad. Okay. Liunian Ling took a deep look at Gohan, and under the gaze of Xian's resentful eyes, she put her hand on Xian's left chest and squeezed hard. Don't misunderstand, Liunian Ling isn't some lily. It's just that Xian's sword hilt is on her left chest. If you want her to return to her sword, Liunian Ling must pinch Xian's left chest. After such a torment, Xian's body forcibly turned into specks of starlight under her unwilling expression. Finally, it gathered into the shape of the Xian sword and appeared in Liunian Ling's hand. This inexplicable battle of murdering her master was also temporarily drawn to an end. Aya, am I late? Right after the graceful immortal returned to the sword burial grounds, a lady with a mature temperament and a beautiful face with a hogue on her head, dressed in a long white dress, entered the sword burial grounds. The reason why she was called a lady was because she was carrying a basket of fresh vegetables, pork, live fish and other ingredients in her hands. It seemed like she had just returned from the market. Yo, Zhanlong, you're finally back. The immortal sword-rank sword wielder Lu Lei walked up to her with a fawning expression. Why did you buy so many ingredients? Didn't I tell you not to worry about these things? Saving lives is more important? It's all right, Lei. Madame Zhanlong was still full of smiles as she handed the basket full of ingredients to Lu Lei. I know that you like stewed beef with potatoes the most, so I bought some more. Are you happy? I'm so happy. I'm so touched. Lu Lei was so happy that he was about to cry. Lele, where's Yi Xian? Hurry up and teach her a lesson. She's in a hurry to boil water and stew meat. Madame Jean Long scanned the surroundings. Strange, why can't I see Yi Xian? It's all right, Yi Xian has already been taken care of by this little brother. Lu Lei dragged the confused Jean Long to the side of Gahan and Liunian Ling. He pointed at Liunian Ling and introduced, "Let me introduce you. This is the eldest daughter of the Liunian family, the future head of the Liunian family, Miss Liunian Ling." Lu Lei then pointed at Gahan. "This is the newcomer sword-wielder Gahan. He was the one who defeated Yi Xian just now." After introducing Gahan and Liunian Ling, Lu Lei finally introduced Jean Long. "She is my sword lady, a spiritual sword lady, dragon-slaying sword. She's the one who I said would arrive in 8 minutes. Look, she's here in a little more than 7 minutes. Haha. Greetings, dragon-slaying sword lady. Greetings, dragon-slaying sword lady." Gahan and Liunian Ling bowed to Jean Long at the same time. Unexpectedly, this sword lady who looked like a full-time wife was actually the famous spiritual sword lady, Jean Long. This was the first time Gahan had seen a spiritual sword lady. The dragon-slaying sword's origin was uncertain, but according to legend, it was the sword of a generation of Heavenly Master Su Sun, Heavenly Master Su in the Middle Ages when he was cultivating in the mortal world. Before Heavenly Master Su reached the Tao, he once killed a flood dragon that was about to become a real dragon on Mount Miling in Yuzhong City, using this dragon-slaying sword. From the legend, the dragon-slaying sword had already broken away from the scope of a mortal sword and reached the level of a spiritual sword. In fact, the dragon-slaying sword was indeed a spiritual sword lady, possessing unimaginable power. It was just that he never thought that such a powerful sword lady would have the same temperament as the neighbor next door, Mrs. Wang. Of course, in terms of beauty, Mrs. Wang could not compare to Mrs. Jean Long. Hee. "It's good that you're fine. It's good that you're fine." Mrs. Jean Long smiled and patted Liunian Ling's head. "Ling has already grown so big. As expected, a girl changes 18 times between childhood and womanhood. At that time, I told Sister Qi Shao that she was a real beauty. After not seeing her for 5 years, Ling has even found a boyfriend. She's really lucky." Qi Shao was Liunian Ling's father, who was also the current master of the Liunian family, the Sword Lady. "No. Lady Jean Long, this person is not my boyfriend." Liunian Ling waved her hand and explained, "He is not Ling's boyfriend. He is Ling's personal disciple." Personal disciple? A few drops of cold sweat appeared on Gahan's forehead. "Miss Ling, let's be clear. When did I, Gahan, become your personal disciple? When? When you learned our Liunian family's secret 5 techniques of fleeting time, you became my personal disciple." Liunian Ling placed her hands on her hips and shouted, "What? You've taken advantage of me, Liunian Ling, and you still want to deny it? You clearly gave it to me on your own accord. I didn't ask you for it." Gahan also said tit for tat. "Besides, if I didn't learn that sword technique, wouldn't you have been chopped into meat paste by Yi Xian long ago? Let me tell you, you've learned it. From now on, you're my Liunian Ling's person. Unless you die, you're my Liunian Ling's personal disciple." Liunian Ling also retorted without any trace of politeness. The two of them immediately quarreled. Quarreling is really intimate." Mrs. Jean Long covered her mouth and smiled like a flower. Let's go, let's go. Don't disturb the two of them." After saying that, she took Lu Lei's arm and pulled him out of the burial sword grounds. "Hey, wait. I still have something to say." Lu Lei was pulled further and further away, and his voice became a little faint. "Gahan boy, remember this. You're a person of my Yuzhong City, and you'll be a ghost of my Yuzhong City even if you die. 3 days later, go to Yuzhong University and report to Dean Gu. Tell him that I, Lu Lei, specially recruited you to Yuzhong University. Remember this, you must go." You're not allowed to go to Yuzhong University, Ling said to Guhan after coming out of the burial sword grounds and returning to the first floor of the sword pavilion. Impossible, Guhan frowned. I'm still a newcomer. Since I have the opportunity to further my studies at Yuzhong University, why not? Didn't I tell you? You're already my Liunyan Ling's disciple. I'll teach you whatever you want to learn, and it'll definitely be better than Yuzhong University. You might not know this, but our family's library is a few times bigger than Yuzhong University's library. Said Liunyan Ling, that's enough. Guhan began to regret his decision to save Liunyan Ling for the sake of Liunyan Ling's family. He regretted exposing his talent, which resulted in Liunyan Ling wanting to take him in as a disciple. I, Guhan, will never become anyone's disciple. You can forget about it. AI. You don't understand. You're a genius, do you know that? Liunyan Ling tried her best to persuade him. Geniuses are not something those mediocre teachers at Yuzhong University can teach. Only a genius like me can teach you. A genius? Guhan sneered. You're so talented that you need me to cheat for you. You. Liunyan Ling was speechless. She had forgotten that he had such an embarrassing handle on her. If she had known earlier, she would have gotten someone else to help her. But then again, she would not have gotten to know such an annoying fellow if she did not get his help to cheat. Hey, Sour Popsicle, you're finally out. My legs are going numb from waiting. The two of them arrived at the entrance of the library, where Song Hama was waving at them. All right, my friend is here. Don't bother me anymore. Guhan glared at Liunyan Ling. I saved your life, so you owe me one. Remember this. Remember my ass. Let me ask you, what about my 5 fleeting forms? Do you think you can just leave after learning our swordplay? Liunyan Ling questioned. How about this? I promise you that I'll never use this 5 forms fleeting time again. Guhan had the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, so of course he wouldn't be interested in the 5 forms fleeting time. You. Liunyan Ling rolled her eyes, and a plan came to her mind. Do you dare to promise that if you use the 5 fleeting forms again, you will become my personal disciple? If you can promise that, I won't pester you anymore. A mouthful of spit is worth a nail. If I say I won't use it, then I won't use it for the rest of my life. After saying that, Guhan swaggered out without looking back. Wait! Liunyan Ling pulled on Guhan's hand. What is it now? Guhan stopped in his tracks and turned around helplessly. You still haven't answered me. How did you defeat Yixian without my guidance? Liunyan Ling couldn't figure out how Guhan defeated Yixian. It's not that difficult. Just do it a few times according to the sequence of 12,345. Guhan gave such an unreliable answer and walked out of the gate of the sword pavilion with Song Hama, who wanted to ask something. Miss, have you obtained the Yixian sword? There was another person waiting for Liunyan Ling at the entrance. He had 3 sword ladies behind him, and it was clear that he was a famed swordsman. When Liunyan Ling got closer, the famed swordsman suddenly turned pale with fright. Miss, you're injured. Why are there so many wounds on your body? It's nothing. Liunyan Ling waved her hand. She had no intention of letting Guhan off so easily. Chapter 60. Ding dong, you have a new message, please check it. Hello, respected new swordsman, Comrade Guhan 36010-3298-3111124617854179. Congratulations on successfully synchronizing the natural ancient sword level sword Maiden Chinpin, sword 10010. You have become an ancient sword level swordsman. Congratulations, Comrade Guhan. You have become a citizen. Citizen ID 66610-3298-3111124617854179. Your citizen ID 36010-3298-3111-1246-17854119 has become invalid. The system has automatically processed the change procedures for you. If you have any other questions, you can seek help from the Sword Bearers Service Center. Congratulations, Comrade Guhan. You are now a member of the Swordsman Committee. The Swordsman Committee ID is 88810-3298-3111-1246-17854119. Your Citizen ID is 66610-3298-3111-1246-17854119. The system has automatically processed the change procedures for you. If you have any other questions, you can seek help from the Swordsman Service Center. Congratulations, Comrade Gohan. Your information has been saved by the Sword Committee. You have become a junior member of the Sword Committee. All the benefits and obligations of a swordsman have been unlocked. Please go to the Sword Level Swordsman Service Center in 3 days to collect your new personal terminal. Congratulations, Comrade Gohan. You have automatically obtained the right to live in the core of Yuzhong City. The system has automatically assigned you a house. Your new house is located in Sankingshan District, Block 15, Block B, Room 601. In the next 24 hours, our service guide will go to your original house to help you move your luggage. Please wait at home. Congratulations, Comrade Gohan. You have become an ancient sword-level swordsman. You have been automatically assigned 3 citizen certificate. You can upgrade 3 citizens to citizen status. They will move with you to Sankingshan District, Block 15, Block B, Room 601. They will enjoy safer living conditions and a more convenient lifestyle. Gohan, who had just returned home, was so stimulated by this series of messages that his head was buzzing. It was a headache. But in this world, who knew how many people had spent their entire lives chasing after this string of news? It was just like a newbie author from 1,000 years ago, chasing after that unreachable contract signing notice in the author's mailbox. Have I finally succeeded? After adjusting the messages to an infinite loop, Gohan let his body fall to the floor. He let the hot tears fall from his eyes. The life he had been looking forward to for 12 years had finally become a reality. It was very strange. When he found out that his sword element had broken through 100, when he entered the sword pavilion to choose a sword lady, when he entered the sword burial grounds to steal the Isien sword, when he found the Qingpin sword and successfully synchronized with her, Gohan didn't seem to feel anything. He didn't want to laugh, cry, tear, or laugh. But when he returned to the humble abode he had stayed in for 12 years, he saw his father, mother, and sister hanging on the wall, he saw the hundreds of stacks of books in his room, he saw the plans he had pasted everywhere, and he saw the plastic sword hanging on the door. Gohan cried. At this moment, he felt that his dream of 12 years had suddenly come true. You're crying. A pair of bare feet with 10 toes that looked like white jelly beans appeared on both sides of Gohan's vision. Her slightly meaty little butt sat on Gohan's chest. Her slightly curved jade-like palms drew circles on Gohan's face, as if they were rubbing numbness. The tears that flowed from Gohan's eyes also soaked Gohan's entire face. Why are you crying? Are you unhappy? Is it because of Qingpin? Qingpin asked with widened eyes. It has nothing to do with Qingpin. Gohan's 2 large hands held onto Qingju's 2 small hands, pressing her firmly against his face. I'm just saying goodbye to the past. The me today is no longer the me of the past. I've already liberated a little of myself. Is that so? Qingpin forcefully shook Gohan's head. Qingpin is hungry. Qingpin wants to eat. Wait for me to get up. I'll make you hot and sour shredded potatoes. Gohan grabbed Qingpin's slender waist and carried her down from his body. In Gohan's fridge, aside from the convenient instant noodles, there were only potatoes and chili. Hot and sour shredded potatoes was the only dish Gohan knew how to make because it was the only dish he had learned when he was a child. Determined to become a chef like his father when he grew up, it took him a whole week to learn from his mother. He hadn't even learned the second dish when, at that time, Gohan was unexpectedly clumsy. Ding dong, you have a new call requesting to connect. Your friend, Song Hama, is requesting to connect. Would you like to connect? Gohan, who was cutting shredded potatoes in the kitchen, suddenly received Song Hama's call request. Hello, what's the matter? I'm busy cooking. If you have something to say it quickly. Gohan said quickly. Hey, Sour Popsicle, it's rare for you to cook. You don't eat instant noodles anymore? Song Hama was surprised. Forget it, that's not important. Let me ask you, did you receive the identity change message from Bat? I received 7 messages in a row. I'll receive it sooner or later. If you want to talk to me about this, I'll just hang up. Chinpin is still waiting for me to cook. AI, you're lucky. Song Hama sighed. Your Chinpin is small, her appetite is definitely not big. My cloud cast iron ate all of my parents' meals, but she was only 30% full. Now I have to buy takeout for her. Hearing Song Hama's words, Gohan couldn't help but think of Cloud Cast Iron's huge body. He estimated that even 10 people's appetite would not be enough to satisfy her. Hey, Sour Popsicle, since we have such a close relationship, I won't beat around the bush with you. Didn't you receive 3 citizenship quotas? Can you give one of them to me? So this was the main purpose of Song Hama's call. It was to ask Gohan for one of his 3 citizenship quotas. In this world, humans are divided into 3 classes: commoners, citizens, and nobles. Compared to the people, citizens could enjoy more material rations, more personal freedom, a safer living environment, and greater political rights. It can be said that becoming a citizen is every commoner's lifelong dream. It's just like how commoners in ancient times yearned to become a scholar. Generally speaking, there are only 2 ways for commoners to become a citizen. The first is to contribute enough to human society. The concept of contribution is very broad, and the calculation method is also very complicated. In short, it is a very difficult way. 99% of people work hard for their entire lives, but still can't reach the contribution requirement to become a citizen. Compared to the first method, the second method is very simple. One only needs to obtain a citizenship quota, which is a certificate of citizenship. Although such certificates are occasionally issued due to other reasons, 99% of the certificates are automatically given by the council when a commoner becomes a sword-bearer. To put it bluntly, this certificate is a reward for the sword-bearer, allowing them to fight for humanity with peace of mind. Generally speaking, these 3 certificates are directly used by the sword-bearers on their parents, siblings, and loved ones, bringing them to a safer core area. Even if they die on the battlefield in the future, their relatives who have obtained citizenship can live a peaceful life. Song Hama has both parents and a pair of cute siblings. In terms of family life, he is much happier than Gohan. He is also the target of Gohan's deep jealousy. But now there is a problem. Song Hama had to bring 4 family members into the core area, but he only had 3 spots. Song Hama has no choice but to ask Gohan shamelessly. After all, Gohan is alone. Sure. Gohan agreed without hesitation. I'll transfer the secret key to my certificate to you later. Thank you, Gohan. Without you, I really don't know what to do. Do you want me to leave Xiaolong or Xiaotu behind? Song Hama seemed to be on the verge of tears. Xiaolong and Xiaotu are also my siblings. I can't leave them in the city. Gohan can't help but think of Song Hama's 2 siblings. To be honest, Gohan doesn't have a good impression of Song Hama's younger sister. On the other hand, Gohan thinks that his younger brother is very cute. Well, let me ask one more thing. What do you plan to do with the remaining 2 quotas? Song Hama asked hesitantly. Of course, he knows that the 3 quotas are unnecessary for Gohan. I don't know. I'll keep them. Gohan quietly replied, "Why do you ask this? Do you still need another quota when you find a girlfriend?" "No, no. How could I?" Song Hama quickly denied. After hesitating for a while, he still said, "It's like this. My mother's good friend, her husband sacrificed himself in the line of duty. She's alone with her daughter. My mother doesn't feel safe leaving her alone in the city. So, she wants to bring her into the core area." "Stinky Toad, I'll be straightforward." Gohan finally finished cutting the potato shreds. "I'm happy to give Xiaolong and Xiaotu a quota. Giving it to your mother's friend has nothing to do with me. Don't talk to me about this anymore." "No, Sour Popsicle, you misunderstood. I, Song Hama, don't have the face to ask you about the remaining 2 quotas. But my mother's friend has also saved up some money. She can buy those 2 quotas from you." "Buy my quota?" Gohan hesitated. "How much is she willing to pay?" In Yuzhong City, there are also sword-bearers like Gohan who have less than 3 relatives. They will secretly sell their citizenship quota to others in exchange for a large sum of money to enhance their strength. However, there are not many sword-bearers born every day, so there are even fewer vacant quotas that are sold. Therefore, in the black market, such citizenship quotas have always been expensive. There are many wolves but not many meat. I've asked around. The current market price of a quota is 600,000. My aunt can barely gather 1 million. I know, Gohan, you'll be at a disadvantage. Just look, I understand. Gohan interrupted Song Hama. I can sell it to her for 1 million, but I want to see that woman. I want to know if that woman is worth my quota. Haha, don't worry. It's definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it. Song Hama laughed 3 times and let out a long sigh of relief. How about this? Aren't we going to the Sword Committee to do the paperwork in 3 days? We'll arrange a place for you to meet then. That's all. I'm hanging up. Gohan hung up. Sigh, he was distracted and the potato shreds were as thick as a finger. Chapter 61. On the second day, Gohan logged into the game again. "What are you doing?" Gohan tapped the tip of the sword on his throat. "Queen Yu, how did I make you angry? You actually have the face to ask this king why? It seems like you really forgot what you said." King Yu's sword tip pushed forward again. "I'm going to kill you. You liar. You can't kill him." Suddenly, Qingpin's cold voice sounded. "Your sword doesn't have any killing intent. This king just doesn't want to return to the endless darkness." King Yu snorted and retracted his sword. "Who are you? You're hiding your head but showing your tail. You can actually sense if there's any killing intent on this king's sword." "She's Qingpin's sword. I got her in real life." Gohan touched his throat and explained. He then looked at the void and asked doubtfully, "Poor, you still can't transform your mother into a physical body? In this world, Qingpin's body is sealed very strongly. Qingpin can't break through it," Qingpin replied. "Then why can you transform into a physical body in real life? Haven't you been sealed in real life?" "I don't remember," Qingpin said calmly. "Once I recovered my consciousness, I was in your hands." "Alright, as long as you don't find it boring to maintain the form of a sword." Gohan carried Qingpin's sword on his back and looked at the system time. "King Yu, didn't you send anything over when I wasn't around?" "Humph. This king has been watching television and has no time to care about your stupid delivery," King Yu said coldly. "Oh no. This is bad." Gohan patted his head in annoyance. "I bought a beautiful scabbard for you in the online game auction house. This is the result of me working for an entire night. I said that it would be sent to my sword tomb in an hour, so I slept for an hour before going online to look for you. It's actually not here yet." Logically speaking, Gohan just randomly picked a beautiful and cheapest scabbard from the auction house and placed an order. After buying it, he immediately fell asleep and entered dreamland. Yesterday was the crusade mission, the battle with Yi Xian, and the planning of a new dungeon raid strategy. Guhan's spirit was almost overdrawn. He fell asleep the moment his head touched the pillow. "You're saying that you came one night late to choose a scabbard for me?" King Yu's expression instantly changed. He was a little cold, a little touched, and a little expectant. "Oh right, I remember now. Just now, something seemed to have fallen out of thin air and fell under the bed. Look for it and see if it's inside." The King of Yu looked as if he had just thought of it. "Strange. How did it fall directly under the bed?" Guhan's words caused King Yu's face to turn red. Even a fool could guess that this delivery was kicked under the bed by the furious King Yu. Guhan crawled under the bed and took out the tightly packed long box. He tore open the seal on the box and an antique, exquisite and elegant scabbard appeared in Guhan's hands. Common scabbard, copper blade. After storing the sword Maiden, it recovers 0.8% of the sword Maiden's durability every second. After storing it for 28 minutes, the sword Maiden will return to its peak state. Usage restriction. Famous sword Maiden, take a look and see if you like it. If you don't, I'll buy another one for you until you like it. Guhan placed the scabbard in King Yu's hands and promised sincerely. Alright, to be honest, in order to buy this scabbard, Guhan had already spent all the 10,000 renminbi he got from Mingyu. It was impossible for him to buy another one. Barely. This king has used hundreds of scabbards like this before. King Yu said that he didn't like it, but in reality, the more he looked at it, the more he liked it. He wanted to immediately enter the scabbard to experience it. "It's good that you like it. King Yu, do you want to go in and try this?" "I'll give it a try," King Yu answered happily. "Then I'll hold your hilt." Guhan glanced at King Yu's plump butt. King Yu understood and nodded shyly. Guhan's hand directly entered. With a push and pull, King Yu returned to his sword form and was sent into the scabbard by Guhan. "King Yu, is it comfortable inside?" Guhan asked through the scabbard. "Barely. I'll stay inside for a while longer," King Yu replied. "Only for a while. We're about to enter the dungeon." Before King Yu could react, he was tricked into a new dungeon by Guhan. Although he was a swordsman and had the Qing Pin sword, in this world, there were hundreds of ancient sword-level swordsmen who shed their blood on the battlefield every day. However, in this world, there were hundreds of ancient sword-rank sword-bearers who shed their blood on the battlefield every day. There were also hundreds of ancient sword-rank sword-bearers who were stuck at this level for the rest of their lives. If Guhan didn't want to follow in their footsteps, he couldn't slack off and waste a single second. After resting for a night, Guhan, who had recovered his energy, tricked King Yu into the scabbard and immediately entered the game. He started the strategy for Sword Lady Online 00002 Solo Dungeon. Ancient Sword Level Dungeon. Wudong's Apex was the second dungeon in Sword Lady Online's main dungeon. It was the next dungeon that every player had to pass after clearing the initial dungeon, King Yu's Gojian. It was also the first dungeon of the ancient sword level dungeons. Only by clearing the Wudong's Apex dungeon could one unlock the other 6 ancient sword level dungeons. The Wudong's Apex dungeon was not like King Yu's Gojian. After hundreds of years, no one had cleared the SSS rank dungeon. In the 5th year after this dungeon appeared, the strongest ancient sword level player at that time succeeded. There were many posts on the forums. As long as one was strong enough and followed the posts, about 10% of players could reach S rank and above, and 0.5% could reach SSS rank. However, this didn't mean that at SSS rank, Guhan couldn't surpass the achievements of others. It was just that the difficulty was shocking. The Wudong's Apex dungeon described a story from 800 years ago. It was a story that really happened. At that time, the Kanzu calendar had already disappeared. Only 4 headquarter cities had been built, and the human forces were all holed up in the headquarter cities. However, after 200 years, there were still remnants of humans outside the headquarter cities. For example, on the highest peak of Wudong Mountain, there was still a group of humans who were stubbornly surviving. Under the protection of the True Force Sword, they opened up fields and dug out caves, living a secluded life. However, after 200 years of this secluded life, danger finally came to the peak. The Dark Dragon King, Yuan Ko, chose the Wudong's apex as his lair in the 3D world. Naturally, he decided to exterminate all humans within the range of Wudong Mountain. The True Force Sword, which protected Wudong, fought with the Dark Dragon King. Relying on a powerful skill, it successfully injured the Dark Dragon King, but at the same time, the wielder of the True Force Sword died. Without a wielder, the True Force Sword could no longer protect the peace of Wudong Mountain. Later, a wielder of Yanjin City accidentally entered the peak of Wudong Mountain. He saved most of the survivors and brought them back to Yanjin City. The apex dungeon of Wudong Mountain was based on this story, and Gohan entered the dungeon to play the role of the wielder of Yanjin City. He had to report the situation to the Yanjin base city before the Dark Dragon King regained its strength and launched another attack on the Wutang Mountain. He had to protect the Wutang Mountain with all his might before reinforcements from the base city arrived. System notification: Player Military Governor, welcome to the Apex Dungeon of Wudong Mountain. Mission objective: protect the safety of 758 people at the apex of Wudong Mountain. The fewer the number of deaths, the lower the health loss, the higher the dungeon score. System notification: Mission 1 has been updated. Distress signal: the communication device you carried with you was damaged in the previous battle. However, the core components of the device are still intact. In the Golden Palace of the Golden Peak of Wudong Mountain, there is a 200-year-old broadcast device. You can remove the core components of the broadcast device to restore your connection with the base city. Gohan opened his eyes and saw that he was lying on a stone slab under a large tree. This was the standard starting point of the dungeon, the foot of Wudong Mountain. The distance from the Golden Peak to the Golden Peak was 1,600 meters, and it would take about 2 hours to get there on foot. There were 2 paths from the foot of the mountain to the Golden Peak. One was the main road and the other was a small path. The main road was flat, and it would take about 2 hours to reach the Golden Peak. However, there were 3 fences set up by the Obsidian Dragon's subordinates to prevent humans from escaping from the top of the mountain. An average Ancient Sword Dreaming Souls player would need at least 2 hours to break through these fences. Including the 2 hours of climbing the mountain, it would take a total of 4 hours. Climbing the small path to the Golden Peak would take 3 hours, which was 1 hour faster than the main road. From this point of view, it seemed that the small path was the perfect choice. Not only could it avoid combat, but it could also buy more time. There was no better choice than the small path. However, according to the guide, this was a trap. While taking the small path could save time and avoid combat, it would definitely lose the chance of getting an SSS rating. This was because when players reached the top of the mountain, they would immediately trigger a storyline event. A group of Taoist priests would attempt to break through the blockade and escape Wudong Mountain. However, the Wudong Taoist priests had underestimated the defensive strength of the defense line. If they charged blindly, they would be completely wiped out. Not only would Gohan lose the few NPCs he had, but he would also suffer at least 15 casualties. The requirement for an SSS rating was that no more than 3 people died. This was far from an SSS rating. This battle was happening at the end of the main road. There was no intersection between the small path and the main road. If they went through the small path, they would not be able to stop the battle on the main road. As such, they had to kill their way up from the main road. They had to break through the blockade and regroup with the survivors before they could escape. Let's fight, King Yu. Gohan unsheathed the King Yu's Gojian sword. After a flash of starlight, the sword lady, King Yu, stood beside Gohan. Inhale, inhale. King Yu took a deep breath of the pure air of Wudong Mountain. Sword lady King Yu, I can fight for you. Chapter 62. Mount Wudong was located in the northwest of Yi Province. Its height was not considered high, but the overall terrain of the mountain was extremely steep. Its surroundings were flat, allowing for the construction of all sorts of houses and Taoist monasteries. The middle of the mountain towered into the clouds, resembling a heavenly palace. At the beginning of the main road up the mountain, it was a dilapidated cement road with cracks everywhere. The cement road was about 10 meters wide, telling Gohan how smooth and spacious this road was 200 years ago. Unfortunately, in the dungeon 200 years later, only a portion of the cement road remained, recounting its history. This was the apocalypse 200 years after Earth was conquered by Yuan Ko. The first line of defense set up by the Black Dragon King was located at the foot of Mount Wudong, the only place that preserved traces of humans. The cable car entrance. Built in 2003 AD, the Mount Wudong cable car fully displayed the excellent quality of China's manufacturing industry 200 years ago. The cable car ropes of several thousand meters long were still intact, hanging from the cement pillars that extended up the mountain. A portion of the cable car carriages were still hanging below the rope. However, their original colorful paint was completely mottled. However, more than half of the cable car entrance had collapsed. Only the ticketing hall that sealed off the main road entrance remained standing in perfect condition at the narrow mountain road intersection. 200 years ago, to prevent fare evasion, humans used the ticketing hall to perfectly seal off the entire path up the mountain. 200 years later, the Yuan Ko used this hall to seal off Gohan's rescue route up the mountain. Of course, Gohan did not care about this blockade, as long as he could kill his way through. The Goblin Mage Slime was currently in a good mood. Ever since he was lucky enough to be accepted by the Black Dragon King as a subordinate, he was assigned to this picturesque place as a guard. With dozens of subordinates at his beck and call, his days were carefree. The only downside was that there was too little entertainment. It would be even better if he could bring his goblin wife over. The long nights were very boring. Cough cough, the male goblins were too big, even some dirty deals couldn't be done. However, in recent days the Goblin Mage Slime found something good. He found a human iPhone in a corner. The bottom button of the phone had already fallen off, leaving a small hole. The slime really liked this phone. One day, the Goblin Mage Slime was hiding in his room, playing with his precious phone. Suddenly, there was an urgent knock on the door. "Lord Mage, it's not good. A human sword wielder is coming, 3 of our brothers are dead." One of the Goblin Mage's subordinates was so agitated that they couldn't even speak clearly. After a long moan, a trembling voice came from the room. "Kugu, what kind of sword wielder is he? Is his sword mistress very powerful? Could it be the kind of skill that kills a large group with a single sweep?" When the Goblin Mage Slime thought of sword wielder, he couldn't help but tremble in fear. When he and his subordinates first entered this world, they were very unlucky to meet a human sword wielder. That sword wielder's sword mistress was so powerful that it scared them to death. His fireball spell didn't have any effect on her body, and she swept her sword in the air, causing a large group of his subordinates to fall to the ground. Thinking back, he led an entire slim tribe of over 200 people into this world. After fighting with that sword mistress for less than 5 minutes, he only had a dozen subordinates left. If it wasn't for the Dark Dragon King's sudden appearance that caused the sword wielder to flee, he would have lost his life there. If the sword wielder they met this time could still sweep a large group like before, then he wouldn't say anything and immediately run for his life with his iPhone. "Lord Mage, that sword mistress only knows shoddy sword skills, she's not even as good as me. But her weapon is really too powerful. A few of our brothers were grazed by it, and we immediately lost our lives." The subordinate replied. "Oh, you're saying that she doesn't know that kind of sword aura that can sweep a large group?" The Goblin Mage Slime cried out in pleasant surprise. After a dozen seconds, she opened the door and raised her magic staff. Long live the Dark Dragon King, Zayunada! Let those sword-wielder witness the power of the slime's fireball spell. When the goblin mage slime rushed to the scene of the battle, he saw an extremely ugly and disgusting human woman holding a sword being attacked by a dozen of his subordinates. Just like what the goblin who reported the news said, this woman's sword skills were really terrible. Even a 7- or 8-year-old brat's sword skills were better than hers. However, the number of spiked maces on the ground had increased from 3 to 5. It seemed like 2 more goblins were sacrificed when his subordinate reported the news. As for their corpses, they were probably sucked away by the dimensional whirlpool. King Yu, recall the sword moves I taught you as you fight. Don't forget to use them when you're anxious. You've wasted 5 minutes against these small fries. The goblin mage slime realized that behind the sword mistress, there was a human standing on a tree and saying something loudly. With every sentence the human said, the sword mistress's expression turned uglier, and her attacks became more ruthless. The human who was standing on the tree and talking was naturally Guhan. King Yu continued the state of forgetting sword techniques in the King Yu Go Jian sword instance dungeon and could not remember her King Yu sword technique. In a real fight, she was no match for Yuan Ko of the same level. Coincidentally, the Yuan Ko on this line of defense were the most trashy rat-level goblins. Yuan Ko goblins were naturally the best opponents for King Yu to practice her swordsmanship. After obtaining the 5 forms of fleeting time from Liuyan Ling, Guhan taught it to King Yu. That's right, Guhan had promised never to use the 5 forms of fleeting time again, but he had not promised not to teach it to his sword mistress. Yuan Ko name: Goblin Warrior. Level: Rat level. 2D world: Western Demonic Beast. Instance dungeons: all Western Demonic Beasts faction instance dungeons. Health: half a star. Attack: 1 star. Agility: half a star. Demonic power: none. Ability: holds a mace in his hand and uses it to launch sneak attacks. This is his specialty. Ultimate move: Wolf Fong Sneak Attack. Description: a cannon fodder soldier in the Western Demonic Beasts faction. The basic soldier type of the goblins and the most numerous soldier type. Though their abilities are too trashy, they consume little energy and are easy to feed. They are also quite obedient and good at fighting with ants. They are the subordinates of every Western demonic beast that aspires to become Yuan Ko's boss. If that Yuan Ko's boss doesn't have a goblin, he will be mocked by the other Yuan Ko. Despicable, why are these green-skinned bugs so nimble, to make this king be mocked by these despicable humans? This king will definitely kill all of you. King Yu's heart was about to explode. He wanted to grow a few hundred hands and kill these goblin warriors in front of him. However, King Yu was anxious and his hands became more and more disorderly. The goblin warriors took advantage of the gaps and fiercely hit him a few times. System notice: you have received damage, shield energy -1. System notice: you have received damage, shield energy -1. System notice: you have received damage, shield energy -1. Thanks to King Yu's famed sword physique, these goblin warriors only dealt the lowest amount of damage to King Yu's shield. However, King Yu's shield energy was decreasing at a visible rate. Under normal circumstances, famed sword wielders had at least 10,000 quarks of sword essence. Multiplied by King Yu's defense ratio of 0.95, King Yu's shield energy was 9,500. This damage was like a tickle to King Yu. However, Gohan had obtained King Yu through unorthodox means. He was still an ancient sword wielder with 500 quarks of sword essence, so King Yu's shield energy was only 495. 5 minutes into the battle, King Yu had already been hit more than 200 times by the goblin warriors, and he had lost more than 200 points of shield energy. He still had half of his shield energy left, but he had only killed less than a third of the goblin warriors. How could King Yu endure this? His opponent was the trashiest Yuan Yin. The more King Yu thought about it, the angrier he became. He casually slashed at the air, and there was actually a mistake in this move. He had clearly slashed at the air, but a goblin warrior had been possessed by the withered god, and had tried to dodge in the opposite direction. As a result, he crashed into King Yu's sword. Even though it only grazed one of the goblin's arms, the goblin warrior's eyes widened and it died. King Yu's damage ratio was 0.062, multiplied by 500. Each slash dealt more than 30 points of damage. Adding on the fact that King Yu was a famed sword-grade sword maiden, he had a massive level suppression on the mouse elemental lizards. Almost every strike dealt perfect damage. The goblin warriors only had 20 or so HP, so naturally, he killed them with one strike. The corpses of the dead goblin warriors were sucked away by the dimensional vortex. It was as if their maces were made from this world's materials, so they weren't sucked away by the dimensional vortex and were left on the ground. Humph, serves you right. You actually dared to provoke this king. King Yu said proudly, as if he had forgotten that he had just aimed at the air. Just as King Yu was feeling proud of himself, a crimson ball of light shot over and hit King Yu's face. System notice: you have received damage, shield energy -3. The goblin mage slime had finally attacked. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.